I'm proud to read the speeches of two young Warringah residents who entered speeches for the competition in Raise Our Voice campaign as part of Youth Voice in Parliament Week. They were asked, what do you want your community to look like in the next 10 years and what can the next Parliament do to achieve it? Now, these two speeches, in some way I'm very grateful to have them, but I'm a little sad at their topics. The first one, Zoe. My name is Zoe and I'm 12 and my electorate is Warringah. I want our community to be climate change free in 10 years. Today, I will explain the very simple changes our Parliament can introduce to make this happen. We use coal as a fuel to generate electricity for our homes, and we don't even think about the damage to our environment. Every morning when you turn on the light, do you even once think, do I need this or should I just open the curtains? We need to educate people. Open the curtains and think about renewable power. Coal causes 0.3 of each degree in global warming, leading to extreme weather events like fire and flood. We must reduce mining, even though it is Australia's biggest export. We should bring in laws to encourage miners to invest outside coal. In the meantime, I have a plan to help Australia's mining industry get money and balance air pollution. For every 100 tonnes of coal mined, companies should plant 1 tree. That's 4 million new trees per year. Only when these tasks and many more are completed will we be at rest from the war against climate change. Now, Emmy is also a very, I think, challenging contribution. I want to walk home. I am a 16-year-old girl and I cannot walk around my neighbourhood by myself at night. I am 16 and I can have a full-time job. I can apply for my own passport and I can have my own Medicare card. But I still can't walk around my neighbourhood by myself at night because it's dangerous. 35% of women worldwide have experienced physical or sexual violence. I'm privileged enough to be able to say that I live in a safe community, but I still can't go out by myself at night, and in the next 10 years I want to be able to do that. I want my community to be a safe space for women, and I want gender-based violence to be a focus by the police force in my community. The future needs to be a safe space for women, where girls don't have to be too cautious of the person walking behind them. It's achievable if it is put as a focus. This is an issue that we face now because what if it was your wife or daughter or your friend? So thank you, Emmy and Zoe, for very powerful contributions, very topical subjects to pick. I think from a personal perspective, some of the two most important issues that actually drove me to come into politics and to be in this place to try and make change on these very big issues. I know many people in this place are dedicated to making sure those two big issues, gendered violence against women and climate change, remain the core focus of the government.
Thank you. The member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted to represent the winner of the Macarthur Raise Our Voices campaign, Lania Salmamao, and stand here in this Parliament to read her winning entry, which is as follows. My name is Lania. I am 18 years old, and as the school captain at Campbelltown Performing Arts High School, I've seen the profound impact of rapid urbanisation on our Macarthur community. The growth and verticalisation of our area, while bringing new opportunities, have also led to cramped spaces, outdated infrastructure and a troubling increase in pollution, especially in areas like Queen Street in the Campbelltown CBD. In the next 10 years, I envision Campbelltown evolving further into a green city, a community that prioritises open green spaces, celebrates our native flora and fauna and embraces modern, sustainable infrastructure. By doing so, we can not only enhance the beauty and functionality of our community, but also foster a stronger sense of belonging and pride amongst residents. This transformation requires commitment and collaboration. I believe with additional federal funding we can maintain and expand our green spaces, plant more native plants and revitalise our outdated buildings and shops. This investment is not just about aesthetics, it's about creating a healthier, more vibrant environment that meets the needs of our rapidly growing population. I believe by working together with community members, local leaders, schools and businesses, this vision will become a reality. Together we can ensure that Campbelltown stands as a model for sustainable urban development where the environment and community thrive hand in hand. Very well said, Lania, and I couldn't have put it better myself. I believe Lania's views are shared by a greater number of people in Macarthur, including myself, and I will continue to advocate for greater green spaces, wildlife protections and for smarter, more lifestyle-friendly community areas to our councils and state and federal governments. I am very frustrated by the constant urban development that's occurred in southwest Sydney and the lack of infrastructure to go with it, be it in health, transport or education, that should be provided to these new areas but just isn't. This also includes poor planning for environmental protections, particularly our koalas. I believe every generation has a duty to ensure the generation that follows inherits a community that is better than the last, and we must do better with our local infrastructure, particularly for our young people. We are amongst the most rapidly growing areas in Australia. In fact, my electorate has recently had some major boundary changes because we are, by population, the biggest electorate in the country. Yet state governments and also federal governments have not provided the infrastructure. For example, they haven't provided a public transport link to the new Western Sydney airport from southwest Sydney. This is terrible, and it's a great shame that this has not happened under previous governments and this one as well. Thank you.
Thank you. The member for Parkes.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Today I'm making a speech on behalf of someone else. It's part of the Raise Our Voice Australia, and so I'm about to read a speech written by Molly from Dubbo, and when I've read this speech, everyone in Dubbo will know who I'm speaking about. Honourable Members of Parliament, I am from the Parkes electorate, and today I stand before you not just as a survivor but as an advocate for change. At 18, I've spent over a third of my life fighting osteosarcoma, a rare and deadly cancer that too many young Australians face, yet too few know about. In the next 10 years, I envision a community where sarcoma is no longer the forgotten cancer, and where every young person diagnosed with this disease has access to the research, treatment and support they need to survive and thrive. But to make this vision a reality, Parliament must act now. Sarcoma kills more teenagers than any other cancer, yet it receives less than 1% of all cancer funding. This is unacceptable. We need dedicated funding for sarcoma research, national awareness campaigns, and the resources to ensure that no family has to face this battle alone. As a member of the Dubbo Youth Council and the 2024 Dubbo Citizen of the Year, I know far too many families who have lost young people to this deadly disease. I've raised funds, shared stories and fought to make a difference, but I need your help to secure the necessary funding to bring hope to these families. Together we can ensure that in 10 years, sarcoma is no longer a death sentence, but a challenge we have faced and overcome. I won't rest until we do. Molly from Dubbo.
Thank you. The member for Maribyrnong.
I'm afraid to report that a terrible abuse of power has been uncovered at a council in my electorate. The Victorian Independent Broad-Based Anti-Corruption Commission, IBAC, yesterday released a special report into Operation Leo, an investigation into bribery and misconduct between some councillors of Moonee Valley City Council and some associates of the Essendon Royals Soccer Club. The report is shocking and underscores the seriousness of local council work. IBAC spent 17 months examining Moonee Valley City Council and the Essendon Royals Soccer Club, found systemic corruption vulnerabilities, failure to follow proper processes, conflicts of interest and failure to report corrupt conduct. Former Councillor Cam Nation, Councillors Jacob Bedio, Councillor Samantha Byrne, Councillor Narelle Sharp were raided. They had their devices seized in August 2023 as part of the investigation. The wide-ranging anti-corruption investigation found some Moonee Valley councillors misused their positions as elected officials to seek or obtain preferential outcomes for the Essendon Royals Soccer Club. They used their power to influence council decisions, bypass council decision-making processes, and inappropriately disclose council information to the Essendon Royals Soccer Club. IBAC found Cam Nation, the former mayor of Moonee Valley City Council in Melbourne's inner northwest, received drugs and kickbacks in exchange for using his power to influence council decisions. IBAC found that several Moonee Valley councillors received other inducements, including dinners paid for by the sporting club. I want it on the record that my office has attended meetings with the soccer club. As part of our electorate duties, my office and I meet with hundreds of sporting and community groups. As an elected member, I take my role meeting with various groups seriously, and nothing can be more serious than elected officials abusing their power for their personal gain. I'm glad this behaviour has been rooted out. Cam Nation resigned in May this year. However, the investigation does vindicate some of the other councillors of Moonee Valley City Council working hard to represent their community. Through all this, the three Labor councillors, Pierce Tyson, Rose Eisner and Katrina Hodgson, have acted with absolute integrity, standing up to the worst of local council conduct. They've consistently called out this bad behaviour. The IBAC Commissioner, Victoria Elliott, said in her report, "When councillors misuse their positions as elected officials, they undermine a council's effectiveness and erode the community's trust in local government. It's critical, therefore," this is now me quoting, "it is critical, therefore, to vote for councillors who you can trust will always do the right thing." Operation Leo highlights the importance of progressing local government reforms to address enduring concerns with councillors misusing their positions for personal advantage at the expense of the public interest. This is not the community I know, nor does it reflect the values of the community. I fully support the report and its important findings.
Thank you. The member for Leichhardt.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to honour an incredible man whose life and legacy left an indelible mark in our region and indeed in our nation. Guju Guju, also known as Seth Formale. Guju Guju was not only a dear friend but a mentor, a leader and a source of immense strength and wisdom to many people in my community, myself included. His contributions to the Indigenous sovereignty movement, social justice and environmental advocacy were profound. He was a man deeply committed to preserving the rich cultural heritage of the Yidinji people. Perhaps one of Guju Guju's most remarkable achievements was his unwavering determination to bring home the remains of ancestors that had been taken to Germany back in the 19th century. His journey to repatriate those remains was not just an act of cultural preservation, it was an act of restoring dignity and justice to his people. It was a victory for all First Nations Australians. Guju Guju was a powerful figure, whether it was in his role in seeing the Aboriginal flag officially flown in Cairns, and we were one of the first cities in Australia to do so, or leading the campaign to rename Blackfellows Creek to Bana Gadinja Creek. Guju Guju's actions were bold, meaningful and driven by his deep passion for justice and his commitment to his people's sovereignty. In every conversation I've had with him, Guju Guju's understanding of land, culture and history left a lasting impact. He had a unique ability to not only communicate the issues facing his people, but to make you feel the soul behind those issues. Despite his achievements, Guju Guju never ever sought the spotlight. He was a humble man. His laughter and warmth would light up a room. Above all, he was a devoted family man. His greatest source of pride and joy, to his wife Jenny and to his children, I offer my deepest condolences. Your husband and father was a man of great courage and wisdom, and his legacy will inspire generations to come. Though we mourn his passing, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must also celebrate the incredible life that he lived and the work that he did to make our region and our country a better place. Rest in peace, my friend. I love you dearly. You are certainly dearly missed, but I can assure you, you'll never, ever be forgotten. Thank you.
Thank you. The member for Boothby.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Raise Your Voice competition asked young people to write a speech to Parliament. This year they were asked, what do you want your community to look like in the next 10 years and what can the next Parliament do to achieve it? I was lucky enough to have a number of speeches from students in Boothby with topics as broad as homelessness, plastic recycling, the impact of academic pressure on mental health, artificial intelligence and tree legislation. And this year's winner is 18-year-old Chelsea. Chelsea writes, 21% of Australians live with a disability. In 10 years, I envision equal tertiary education outcomes for students with disability, including achieving population parity within universities. Many states adjust tertiary selection ranks to account for disclosed disabilities, but South Australia's Tertiary Admissions Centre fails to, disadvantaging students with disabilities in achieving the required ATARs for their preferred courses. While reasonable adjustments like extra exam time and assistive technology aim to level the playing field, they're often poorly organised, failing to meet students' needs, which can at times fluctuate, often incompatibly with the rigid structure of Year 12. People with disabilities are also more than twice as likely to face financial stress. I urge Parliament to encourage universities in all states to increase the placement of disability-based scholarships on EAS portals, as finding funding is often the most difficult for those who need it. Including disability in tertiary EAS schemes and centralising financial aid would boost commencement and retention rates for students with disability. Chelsea finishes, I encourage members to engage with universities and admission centres in their states to incentivise these changes and to champion legislative commitments ensuring our educational outcomes both domestically and abroad. Chelsea, thank you for your speech. Equitable access to education and employment opportunities are an important part of disability rights and, as you say, an important part to enable people with disabilities to have secure financial futures as well. It's an important part of ensuring every Australian has every opportunity to maximise their potential and live a fulfilling life. And of course, it's an important part of workforce strategy, making sure we have a skilled workforce for all types of jobs and sectors across the economy. I'd like to give a shout out to the Up the Hill program, which encourages participation of adults with a range of disabilities, including intellectual disability, in the social and educational life of Flinders University in my electorate. Up the Hill provides an inclusive and supportive opportunity, enabling people with a disability to access the university environment with support from a peer mentor. Because access to education and employment for people with disabilities matters and it's achievable.
Thank you. The member for Bradfield.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Rhys Hibbert of St Ives High School is an inspiring young constituent of mine. When he was 18 months old, Rhys was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia and underwent extensive treatment, which happily was successful. His resilience and strength led him to set up Donate for Life, a charitable organisation which is doing important work. This charity encourages young people to register their stem cells on the Australian Bone Marrow Donor Registry and to donate blood products to Lifeblood when they turn 18. Rhys also participated in the Youth Voice in Parliament competition organised by Raise Our Voice, which encourages young people under the age of 25 to write a short speech about the issues that matter most to them. I received several impressive proposed speeches from young constituents. I thank all of them, and I'll post all of the speeches on my website. But I've chosen Rhys's speech to read out. My name is Rhys. I'm a 17-year-old who lives in the electorate of Bradfield. In 10 years' time, I want my community to be much more encouraging of young people. In 10 years, I want young people to be seen as the biggest givers, the biggest donors. What do I mean? I mean that our ageing population is going to need young people to donate. They need us to donate our time, our blood products, stem cells, and our organs. We have to now encourage young people to learn how they will be important parts of our future society. We need to encourage them more to become donors and help other people. We need young people to be at the centre of the giving community and acknowledged as such. We need to encourage, as the words of John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Today, we have to put in place ways that young people are rewarded by giving to society in whatever way they can. This is not the me society, but the us society. Those are fine words from Rhys Hibbert, and I can say that they are entirely consistent with Rhys's character. I've had the chance to meet him on several occasions. I've been very impressed, first of all, with his courage in going through what he endured, particularly as a very young child. I might say I've also met his parents and heard from them what a ordeal that was for their family. But I've been very impressed by the work that Rhys has been doing over the last few years in sparking and driving practical support for people who have a need for these kinds of transfusions, and his work encouraging people to register their stem cells on the Australian Bone Marrow Donor Registry. So congratulations, Rhys Hibbert, and thank you for the work you are doing.
Thank you. The member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The Illawarra is an extremely diverse and multicultural region where for decades people from all walks of life have come together to create such a vibrant community and to help build the industries that support our region. The rich cultural heritage is celebrated almost year-round with numerous festivals and community events, which was on full display when we had the Assistant Minister for Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs, Julian Hill, visit Wollongong last month. Assistant Minister Hill spent the weekend visiting a number of the many vibrant multicultural organisations that make our region so unique. Our first visit was to the Illawarra Filipino and Multicultural Women's Group, who were celebrating their 39th anniversary. For 39 years, this remarkable group has been supporting the community, providing a welcoming space where women from diverse backgrounds can come together, share their stories, inspire one another and keep cultural traditions alive. They have built a supportive and inclusive network where women can find friendship, guidance and a sense of belonging. Over the years, the Illawarra Filipino and Multicultural Women's Group has also supported many incredible causes such as the Cancer Council and disaster relief efforts both here and overseas. Thank you to their president, Remy Marcina, founding member Lillian McKinnon and the committee for working so hard behind the scenes to create such an inclusive group. Our second visit was to celebrate with the Greek Orthodox Church of the Holy Cross for their 70th anniversary. For the past 7 decades, our vibrant Greek community in the Illawarra has made significant and meaningful contributions to our local area. The parish priest, Father Sophronios, and the Church of the Holy Cross in Wollongong has been a central pillar in the lives of many of the Greek community, providing a space of worship and enabling cultural activities. Thank you to Eugenia Spirides for your lovely speech at the event, and thank you to the whole parish for enriching our community by sharing your customs, traditions, amazing food and coffee with the Illawarra. The third stop was to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Nantine Temple. The Nantine Temple is one of many temples of Fo Guangshan, which was founded in 1967 by the late Venerable Master Sing Yun. The late Venerable Master's life was a wonderful example of how the teachings of Buddha can impact one's personal journey towards enlightenment, but also how they can radiate compassion, wisdom and selflessness. It was an honour to join Most Venerable Sing Bao and Venerable Mao Yu for the celebrations where they were presented with a signed certificate by the Prime Minister in recognition of this momentous occasion. The final event for the weekend was a barbecue with the Multicultural Communities Council of the Illawarra, where we shared a meal with many of our local multicultural leaders and shared stories over a delicious meal. MCCI is an integral part of the Illawarra with a proud history of supporting local migrant communities.
Thank you. The member for Hinckley.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, it's on. In Queensland, it's on. And that is the state election campaign. It will be run and won by the 26th of October. And in my local region, I've got 3 exceptional candidates for the Liberal National Party. Firstly, David Lee in Harvey Bay, a well-known local councillor who works hard, who's fighting every single day for the people of that region. And he's up against a Labor state member who's been in witness protection for the last 4 years. And right now, you'd think he'd be out and a bit more vocal, but he's like the Simpsons, Homer into the hedge. He's just disappeared. In Burnett, we've got a local champion in Stephen Bennett, and Stephen is an absolute champion for the regions. He has held that seat for 4 years and he's running for his 5th election, and I wish him every single success. And then, of course, we come to Bundaberg, my hometown, where I was born, Madam Deputy Speaker. And the LNP has Bree Watson running up against the state Labor member for Bundaberg, who I've got to say is absolutely hapless. In 2020 as a candidate, actually committed to a new hospital in Bundaberg 4 years ago, level 5, then withdrew that commitment to say, no, it's actually 5 levels. We weren't talking about level 5 professional hospitals, but 5 stories, which is absolute nonsense. No one will fall for that. And then, in recent days, Madam Deputy Speaker, the member for Bundaberg went on the record and said it's absolutely progressed so far since our commitment in August of 2020, and this is from the Courier Mail on the 8th of October. In fact, we've cleared land and we provided a pile of mulch, and that pile of mulch was delivered to community organisations. Well, I know what the pile of mulch is, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is the commitment from state Labor to actually build a hospital. This is ridiculous. In fact, Mr Smith celebrated that someone offered him a beer because he gave mulch for free to a local community organisation. Well, I can tell the member for Bundaberg, the Labor member, who is not buying a beer, and that is all of those individuals and their families who have been ramped in ambulances at the local hospital over the last 4 years, who are not getting the services that they demand and actually need. This hospital is not being built by 2027. Can you imagine? It hasn't started yet, and apparently it will be built, a $1.2 billion hospital, by 2027. It is nonsense. Bree Watson has committed the LNP to a level 5 training hospital. It will service up to 300,000 people across a regional population. It is an incredibly important piece of infrastructure. They'll continue to deliver Paradise Dam. The LNP is committed to it. This federal Labor government took away the funding. We secured $600 million for Paradise Dam. It has been struck from the budget. That is a tragedy for our local agricultural producers. It is absolute disgrace. So for those who think it's funny that there's a pile of mulch instead of a hospital, go and talk to some of our people in our regional community who need those services that should have been delivered. It is another broken promise from state Labor, and they deserve to have their campaign in ashes on the 26th of October.
Thank you. The member for Whitlam.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Since 2010, I've been holding a forum for young people in my electorate to ensure that their voices are heard. They don't get to vote, but they do have opinions, strong opinions on the things that we deliberate on in this place. And I'm very pleased that this year I've held my 14th round table of young people. Over 100 students from years 9 through till year 12 attended this year from over 10 schools: Dapto High School, St Joseph's Catholic High School in Albion Park, Warilla High School, Albion Park High School, Illawarra Sports High, Lake Illawarra High School, Corpus Christi Catholic High School, Oak Flats and Cannahooka High Schools, the Shell Harbour Anglican College, Mossvale High School, Barrel High School, the Oxley College, Chevalier College and the Southern Highlands Christian College. At the conclusion of the forum, I promised that I'd come back to Parliament and report on the matters that they discussed. One of the big issues facing young people is housing and housing affordability. Their aspirations to either own a house or to be able to afford to move into a house and pay the rent were on display. Deep concerns. They expressed their views about their future if this government, state governments and local governments don't work together to ensure we're working on the issue of housing affordability. They told me that every Australian, regardless of how much money they make, where they live or where they've come from, deserves to have a roof over their head. It's why I'm proud to be a part of a government which has greenlit nearly 14,000 new social and affordable housing, which is the biggest investment in social and affordable housing in Australia in over a decade. Our plan is focused on supply, which is why we're not giving up on our program for 40,000 low and middle income families to enable them to be able to get into the housing market through the government's Help to Buy scheme. And I'm pleased that the Housing Minister has reintroduced the bill into the House of Representatives this week. It's about ensuring that we give more Australians the opportunity to own their own home. Of course, there are many who will not be able to buy a house outright immediately, some who may never be able to. And it's why our 25% increase to rent assistance has been a meaningful uplift, the biggest uplift that we've seen in decades to assist low-income families to put a roof over their head. We believe that it's a legitimate aspiration and a proper role for this government to be focusing on. I wasn't surprised that the issue of vaping also came up, and I want to congratulate the students on the really intelligent discussion they had. We discussed the need for stronger legislation, more education and more enforcement to support their concerns in this area. Access to medical services, HECS debts, domestic violence were also discussed. I'll be putting their ideas into practice to ensure that they're represented in this parliament.
Thank you. There being no further constituency statements by honourable members, I call the member for Dunkley.
Deputy Speaker, I ask leave of the Federation Chamber to move that order of the day number 1, government business, be postponed until a later hour this day.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted. Thank you.
I move that order of the day number 1, government business, be postponed until a later hour in the day.
Is the motion seconded?
I second the motion, Reserve.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of those opinions say aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, and I call the clerk.
Government business, order of the day number 2, Aged Care Bill 2024, resumption of debate on second reading.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Lawler.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And Deputy Speaker, I'm pleased to rise in support of the Aged Care Bill 2024, which has been made in response to the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety. The bill delivers on our election commitment to fix aged care. The Royal Commission passed down 148 recommendations for aged care reforms. 136 have been addressed since the tabling of the report in 2021. 94 have been addressed by the Albanese Labor government since coming to office. This bill responds directly to recommendations from the Royal Commission into aged care and will address 58 recommendations in total. The bill will build on the aged care reforms already put in place by the Albanese government. This has seen $11.3 billion committed for aged care workers to receive a 15% pay rise, to make our aged care workers feel and be valued by our community, to demonstrate their value, to demonstrate that as Australians we appreciate the value of the work that they do, and to ensure that the community understands the importance of the work that they do. We've improved the quality of aged care. We've seen nurses back into aged care facilities. We've seen improvements in nutrition rates. We've seen reductions in some of the behaviours that were highlighted in the Aged Care Royal Commission. Terrible things happening that we saw in that report that was, of course, titled Neglect. And for all of those who were here in this place during the Royal Commission, that pretty much sums up what we were seeing across our aged care sector. So we now have aged care, residential aged care has an additional 3.9 million minutes of care from registered nurses since the Albanese government took office. The Aged Care Bill 2024 is a $5.6 billion package that will improve the way services are delivered to older Australians by providing them with support to live independently and with dignity as they age. I'd like to, at this point, thank the opposition for their bipartisan support in this process to get to this point, their support for the task force and for the measures in this bill. A statement of rights for older people and a positive duty for providers to uphold those rights, which outlines the rights of older people have in the aged care system and guides how workers and organisations must behave and make decisions under the new laws. Has a single entry point to the aged care system with clear eligibility requirements and a fair, culturally safe assessment process, which brings together the different assessment services into a single system, which makes it easier for Australians to access and enter. The framework for delivery of a range of aged care services, including residential care, and the $4.3 billion in a new system of home care support at home program, which will replace My Aged Care, to support older Australians to stay in their home and in the community they love for longer. We'll have improved access to assistive technology and financial assistance to modify homes to make them safe, and we'll see 1.4 million older Australians benefit by 2035. The Aged Care Bill means we'll have fair contributions from those who can afford to contribute to the cost of their aged care to make sure the aged care system is sustainable into the future, but ensuring that the government takes responsibility for all clinical care, and mechanisms for the Commonwealth to fund aged care services, including aged care-related grant programs to providers. Has a new approach of regulating aged care which will balance explicit incentives for continuous improvement and high-quality care, including through new quality standards, and stronger regulatory powers to protect people from harm, and a new ministerially appointed complaints commissioner and whistleblower protections to make sure that older people, workers and others have clear pathways to raise concerns about the quality of aged care services. And I know how important those provisions in this bill are in communities like mine. I know that people will feel safer, will trust the system more readily, knowing that those provisions in place, knowing that there's a complaints commissioner. We all lived through not just the behaviours that led to the Royal Commission and to hearing about the conditions in many aged care services during the Royal Commission, but then, of course, the pandemic and the utter devastation that that meant for a lot of families. And in my electorate, that was acute and critical. We lost a lot of our older community members during COVID in aged care, and I know that families would have welcomed at that point a complaints commissioner. They would have welcomed whistleblower protections, because my community, in parts of my community connected to particular aged care services, were ringing me to be that complaints commissioner, if you like, and that staff members working in the sector were doing similar, were contacting people as much as they could to blow the whistle about what was potentially happening in our aged care centres during COVID. We know that once the infections were in place in facilities, it was very difficult to contain, and we know that that led to an enormous amount of angst and grief. Several principles will underpin these new reforms. Australians will get the support they need and make a reasonable contribution according to their means, as the taskforce recommended. Everyone already in residential and home care will benefit from a no worse off principle from their place in the system. The government will pay all clinical care costs, with individuals contributing to the kinds of costs they would typically pay throughout their lives. And the government will continue to pay for the majority of aged care costs. The task force that was put together has looked at our system and how we might improve it, has looked at the recommendations from the Royal Commission, and has brought together older Australians, their advocates, unions, providers and other experts through this task force, and then consulted widely. The interim report by the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety was titled Neglect, as I've said. The first chapter of the report was titled A Shocking Tale of Neglect, and it did just that. It told a shocking tale of how the former government allowed Australians to be disrespected, neglected and basically forgotten. This bill puts in place measures with support from those opposite to ensure that we don't see that repeated. To see a fragmented system that was poorly managed, unsupported and underfunded, which saw our older, very often vulnerable people neglected, isolated and powerless in an uncaring and unkind system that did not deliver uniformly safe and quality care. This legislation tries to ensure that the system is no longer fragmented, that we're talking about, and that the aim of the government and the aim of the sector is to ensure that we're providing quality aged care. Deputy Speaker, it is there's a temptation to always want to look back when we're talking about aged care to what were very dark days and what were very dark scenes. But I am feeling really positive about the changes that have already been made to the aged care sector under this government. I'm feeling really positive that post-pandemic, our aged care system has recovered, has renewed itself. When I visit the aged care centres in my electorate, I am finding people working in the sector committed to quality care for the people that they're caring for, and I'm finding my residents in aged care happy when I visit, and glowing, as they always were, about the people who were paid to care for them. That was always the case. One of the key changes here, though, that needs to be considered is the package around the new support at home program, because this is critical. What we know is that people would prefer to stay in their own homes for as long as they can. And this package will go a long way to supporting people to make that choice, to progressively make that choice. It's an important program. I lived this program, my aged care program, with my own mother, and the Commonwealth providing assistance for her to stay independent for as long as she did. And I know that this new version will be even better in terms of supporting people at home to stay at home longer. And part of that is around the assessment process being a single entry point and not having to tell the circumstances or the story of your life over and over again to multiple people. That assessment, once made, can then be progressively reviewed, and that the support at home program will mean that people's clinical needs are met at home. It is important work that has been done to bring this legislation forward. It's important work that's been done to create the environment where aged care workers are feeling respected and valued. It's important work to ensure that a sector that was under considerable pressure, both financial and in terms of public perception, it's important that the work that's been done across this last 2.5 years has the sector at the table, prepared to embrace the new provisions, because it means that we can all move forward now with a view to our older Australians being cared for in a way that will leave us able to sleep at night, bluntly, because there were moments during the pandemic when that was certainly a struggle for me and for many in my community. So I'd like to pay tribute to Minister Wells for the work that she has done in preparing this. I'd like to thank all members of the task force for their work under difficult circumstances, coming together to reshape, to have a look at this sector and how it might be improved under this government. And I'd like to again thank the opposition and the crossbench for the way that we've worked together to ensure that this is done in a bipartisan way. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today I rise to speak on the Aged Care Bill 2024. Australia's aged care system is facing a crisis. It's unsustainable and not effectively meeting the needs of our older Australians. With an ageing population, demand for care services is only going to grow, making it crucial that we develop a system that promotes the well-being of older people while remaining economically sustainable. In the next 40 years, the number of Australians over the age of 65 is expected to double, and those over 85 are expected to triple. In Warringah, nearly 17% of the population is over 65, with over 25,000 individuals entering their senior years. These numbers highlight the growing demand for aged care services, particularly the increasing desire for independence and support to age at home. The Aged Care Bill 2024 is an important piece of legislation aiming to deliver significant reforms that ensure quality of care for older Australians. It also seeks to help seniors maintain their independence, especially through ageing at home. My electorate in Warringah and my electorate office regularly receives calls from constituents who need assistance navigating the complex aged care system. And it's not just those needing it themselves, it's often family members find it incredibly complex. The current system is clearly not meeting the needs of the community, and that's why I welcome the reforms. There has been long delays and difficulty in getting the level of care needed by people. The Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety revealed hard truths about our system and horrendous stories of neglect. The final report, titled Care, Dignity and Respect, made 148 recommendations for improving the standard of care. Following the report, there have already been 3 legislative changes, and now this new bill responds to about 60 of the Royal Commission's recommendations, alongside with those made by the Aged Care Task Force. This bill will replace the Aged Care Act of 1997 and the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission Act of 2018. The new legislation gives the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission increased regulatory powers, as recommended by the Royal Commission. It introduces a new regulatory model focused on ensuring that registered providers offer high-quality care while being held accountable. And that is the most important part that we often get feedback from the community, is how do you know the facility you're proposing to send have your loved one live in is actually going to meet their needs. Accountability and oversight are essential in delivering better care, and I support the introduction of a statement of rights for older people in this legislation. Placing the rights of older people at the centre of the law is a necessary step to recognise and protect their dignity. However, I am very concerned, and alongside key stakeholders, how are those rights going to be enforceable? And there seems to have been a watering down of the initial intention when it came to that statement of rights to where it now sits. And when I've visited and discussed this with constituents, many have concerns that that a statement of rights for older people not just be window dressing, that it actually be effective and have some effect in relation to the standard of care and treatment they receive. The Support at Home program, which would come into effect on 1 July 2025, is also another key change in this legislation. It will replace the current 4 Commonwealth home support packages, and so those 4 will become 8 ongoing classifications, and there will be 2 additional short-term classifications, one for restorative care and one for end-of-life palliative care. And I welcome these changes. They aim to better support older Australians in ageing at home, meeting their changing or developing needs, and ensuring they maintain their independence. And of course, the additional short-term classification, restorative care, means assist people in meeting short-term increased needs. And the sad aspect of the palliative care one is, of course, at end of life, that assistance that can make such a difference to the quality of life and supporting of the person and their family through that difficult time. I would note, though, whilst they're good, these changes, they do very little to address the age discrimination and the huge gap that remains between services, between the NDIS and the aged care. It remains that those over 65 that develop or have an accident or develop a disability, they still cannot access a similar level of support and assistance as those under 65 under the NDIS. There is still a massive difference between the maximum level of support in these 8 aged care classifications and even with the additional restorative care aspect or home improvements compared to what is available under NDIS. And keeping in mind that 65, many in this place are at that age threshold, is not, whilst traditionally thought of as a time of slowing down and maybe retirement, many people are incredibly active at 65 and still contributing, working and very active. And if an event occurs that significantly changes that situation, it's still such an incredible contrast that just because of that age threshold, the difference in dignity and support that people will receive is still incredible. And it is still an age discrimination that needs to be addressed. A central feature of the Support at Home program is the no worse off principle. It's designed to provide continuity and certainty for those already in the aged care system. Because of course these are big changes and people have contacted my office concerned about what does it mean for them if they're already in the system. The program also introduces a new assessment tool allowing for more tailored support, and I welcome that, but again, the proof will be in the pudding in terms of how that assessment occurs and making sure that it is not just an automated, overly administrative process, but that it genuinely is flexible and recognises individualised needs of people. One of the key aims of the Support at Home program is a reduction in average wait times for care approval and access to services to 3 months. It's a significant improvement compared to current approval wait times of some 12 months or more. And that delay is devastating because for families, we've had instances where some people have passed away while they're still waiting for their care approval. So I think it's incredibly important that when we're looking at this type of service, that the administrative side of it is effective and efficient, that it's well resourced to make sure there is no delays in wait time. I welcome the government's intention to reduce these wait times, but I do have questions about how they plan to implement the ambitious reduction. So if we've got circumstances going from over 12 months to now it's going to be done within 3 months, you have to question just how. So I hope this is going to be done sensibly and efficiently. I am also concerned about the measures that will be in place to ensure that people are not neglected or forgotten about during those wait times. So even if they are reduced to 3 months, a person's condition can significantly deteriorate in that time, and obviously a lack of support or their need can make a significant difference. The new funding model requires older Australians to contribute more to their care costs, and I know that's of great concern to some, in both the support at home care model and the residential care. Now, we know that for this to remain sustainable with an ageing population, that contribution is necessary. The fees will be based on services used, with full pensioners making low contributions for some aspects of care. Part pensioners and Commonwealth senior health card holders will contribute depending on their income and assets, and self-funded retirees will face higher contributions. The changes to the residential care will include increased contributions to daily living costs and reforms to accommodation contributions. Both the residential care and support at home care will be categorised into clinical care, independence services and everyday living care. In terms of financial contribution, the clinical care will be fully funded by government and funded for everyone. The second category, the independent services such as personal care, will require contributions. And these will range from 5% for pensioners to some 50% for self-funded retirees. Everyday living services, the third categories, and that can include things like cooking and cleaning, will require the highest contributions, from 17.5% for full pensioners to 80% for self-funded retirees. Now, I welcome that contributions will have a lifetime caps and aim to create cost parity between home care and residential care. So, needless to say, these costs arrangements and contribution arrangements are complex, but I do commend the Minister and her team for the diligence in working this out. And I note that the bill has been referred to the Community Affairs Legislation Committee for review, and that will hopefully provide a careful analysis of its economic impact and the viability of this structure. And for my constituents, we will endeavour to have more information as much as possible and ensure that people are engaging with these changes and understand how to properly access the services and what these contribution models mean for them. Our older Australians deserve to live with dignity, and the new aged care bill represents a positive step in addressing the challenges we face as a nation with an ageing population. However, much more needs to be done to ensure that all Australians receive the care and support they need in their senior years. I should note I recently visited the St David's Village in Frenchs Forest to hear concerns from residents there. And the recurring theme was the desire for agency. Older Australians want to maintain control over their lives with autonomy in their services, independence in their living arrangements, and choice as well in end-of-life care. Another key concern was how the government plans to communicate the changes, what transition provisions will be in place, and how it plans to support people through these upcoming reforms. Ensuring older people maintain agency during this transition is crucial. To help seniors, their families and the communities navigate the aged care system, my office, as many other MPs, but in particular, I recently released a seniors guide to assist in organising aged care. What was interesting is so many of the services are digital, right? They're online. But for many people, that is incredibly complex, and they just need a proper hard copy, a roadmap to using these services. So the Seniors Guide has been an incredible success, demonstrating the importance of providing accessible information for informed decision-making. So much of the key information of aged care is assessed online via an online portal. And by making this information available in a simple printed booklet, we've received huge feedback and appreciation from the senior community because it does make it a lot easier to navigate. And so I encourage the government to be mindful of, whilst we want the efficiencies of everything being online and digital, we do need to be mindful that that remained accessible for all. Lastly, I'd like to mention that when considering changes to aged care and how to improve that quality of care, we need to consider how these changes will impact First Nations Australians. The National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Ageing and Aged Care Council is working to better ensure that aged care policies are culturally safe and trauma-aware for elders. Now, it's a massive issue that for older First Nations Australia, the concept or the prospect of residential care brings back a huge amount of trauma, especially if they are part of the stolen generation. And so we have to make sure that throughout this system and throughout legislation, we acknowledge the complexity and the challenge that First Nations Australians face. The Council has made a submission on the bill to the Senate Community Affairs Legislation Committee and makes key recommendations.
A division has been called for in the House. The proceedings are suspended to enable honourable members to attend the division, and the proceedings will resume when the chair is resumed at the conclusion of the division or subsequent divisions. It will all be just fine. You too. Thanks for that. See ya. I thought she was 11 to 12.
We are agenda today
On
on
aged care. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think it was number 11.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. When do we get to privacy? 5 minutes. Yeah. I know, I was like, the first question I asked, I was like, it's 5 minutes, right? What happened with the nuclear? Oh, I didn't even check. That must have just... They're still going on. Yes, yes. I'm fairly sure. Negative, motion agreed to. Yeah, they negative all the amendments and just passed it as predicted. Didn't they agree the first one? No, Ryan. Don't know. Look it up.
The question is that the bill now be read a second time, and I call the member for Indi.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy Speaker. When the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety was released in 2021, it was a moment of reckoning for this country. It was the culmination of what I have described as a slow collapse, one that occurred over decades, of the aged care system in Australia. It was a collapse overseen by Commonwealth governments of all political stripes. The Royal Commission found the aged care system was in such dire need of renewal that an entirely new Aged Care Act was required. The current system simply could not be salvaged. It's the policy-making equivalent of knocking down the house and starting all over again. At the time the Royal Commission was released, I supported all 148 recommendations and called on the government to respond with action and funding, not just words. This bill is an important step forward in responding to these recommendations. In assessing the bill before us, I'm guided by the same values and principles that will always guide my work as the independent member for Indi. Will this bill improve the lives of people in the northeast of Victoria that I represent? Will this bill improve the lives of people all over Australia? Will it help older Australians age with dignity and empower them to enjoy all the richness of their later years? And I know for the people of Indi, where we have a much higher proportion of older people compared to the national average, and where many people move to our beautiful towns to retire, this crucial reform is absolutely essential to their quality of life. I also ask whether this bill will assist aged care providers and aged care workers. This bill is about putting older people at the centre of our aged care system. It's not about putting the providers at the centre of our aged care system, but it's important to remember that aged care workers, the nurses, the carers, the cooks, the cleaners, the admin staff are essential. For many of these people, working in aged care isn't just a job, it's a vocation worthy of dedication. In fact, if I turn my mind back a long way, I remember being a young matron of the Chiltern Bush Nursing Hospital, pulling on my clothes over my pyjamas at 2 a.m. to make sure one of my older residents received the care that they need. I cared deeply about the residents under my watch, and I know that people working in aged care do too, and they want to see a system that delivers the best care possible for their residents. I want to thank those who provide these services in Indi. I want to thank those places like Kellick Lodge in Alexandra, the rural city of Wangaratta, Westmont in Wodonga, St Kath's in Wangaratta, all those who spoke to me about what the bill means to them. I want to thank aged care workers right across Australia. It's important that our aged care system is sustainable now and well into the future. Australia is ageing. By 2026, more than 22% of Australians will be aged over 65, almost triple the 8% of the 1970s. As our country ages, more people will enter the aged care system, and we need to set it up for long-term success. And that's a task that cannot wait for future years and future parliaments. It's a challenge that we must tackle right now. So in analysing this bill, with more than 1,000 pages of legislation and explanatory material, I'm guided by three key questions. Will it put the sector on a sustainable footing as our population continues to age? Will it provide regional Australians with equitable access to quality aged care? And will it enable more Australians to access home care without harmful delays? The Aged Care Bill 2024 implements the first recommendation of the Royal Commission to create a new Aged Care Act built upon a right-centred approach to aged care services. This bill impacts almost all aspects of the aged care system. This includes changes to how at-home care and residential care are funded and establishes a new single assessment pathway for all aged care services. It creates new powers of oversight and enforcement for the aged care regulator and a new statement of rights for older persons, and they will underpin the sector. And I will address each of these. One of the biggest challenges introduced in the bill is to change the way people contribute to the costs of aged care, both residential and at home. While the government will continue to fully fund clinical services like nursing care, allied health and other therapeutic services, a revamped means testing process will ensure that those who are able to will contribute more to non-clinical costs like personal care, such as showering and everyday living like food or gardening costs. And the government has made it clear that lifetime contributions will be capped at $130,000 and how much you will contribute will also be means tested. For those currently in the aged care system, whether at home or residential care, the government's no worse off principle is one we must hold on to and hold them to. This means that no one currently in the aged care system will see their contributions change. The new system will only apply to new entrants. When an older person currently receiving at-home support moves into residential care, they will be able to keep their existing contribution arrangements or opt to move to the new arrangements. However, for new entrants, I do hear concerns about this difference in contributions for clinical and personal care. I query, for example, whether a person should have to contribute for showering services when as someone ages, they absolutely need this basic help. For people who are frail or with chronic disease, it's not an optional extra and can in fact be important clinical care. One of the ways to ensure a sustainable residential aged care system is to ensure it is financially sustainable. The bill seeks to address this by putting more money into the system. To be clear, the government will remain the major funder of aged care. But new provisions in this bill will enable aged care providers to retain up to 2% of the refundable accommodation deposit, or the RAD, in residential aged care facilities each year for up to 5 years. Now, I cautiously welcome this change because I know how hard it is for providers in my electorate to balance their books. We know that in the past year, almost half of residential aged care facilities were making a loss from accommodation. This included facilities in my electorate. By making changes to the RAD and to the room prices, we can help ensure providers stay open in our regional centres and in our tiny rural hamlets. Capital improvements are incredibly difficult to achieve, and I hope that this changes that. However, I will be following the implementation of these changes very closely because we must ensure that any increased revenue resulting from these changes will be reinvested into infrastructure and amenities that the residents need, not corporate profits. This bill also makes changes to the home care system for older people so that more people can stay at home in their communities for longer, and we know Australians want this. I welcome the government's investment of $4.3 billion into home care, and I'll be pushing the government to ensure that people in regional Australia have equitable access to home care. There are a few major themes when it comes to the home care system as it currently exists for people in my electorate of Indi. These themes include the waiting times for assessments, the long distances that must be travelled for care, and the workforce shortages to deliver this care. Across my electorate, whether it be in the upper reaches of the Murray at Mittamitta or in the far south part of my electorate in the Murrumbidgee Shire, I hear from older people who do not receive the full benefit from their existing home care packages because of the cost of travel for providers, and taxis and other travel costs for the participant, and this means their budgets are chewed up way too quickly. I'm also concerned, as are the people I represent in Indi, that the new supported home packages will not be large enough for regional participants, and these issues will be repeated all over again. This concern was echoed by Dr John Davis, a member of the government's Aged Care Council of Elders who lives in Wangaratta in my electorate. His concern that there will not be enough funding in packages to cover the reality of the cost of gardening, cooking and cleaning. We must ensure new supported home participants are going to receive all the care they need, and I'm hopeful the government's plans to expand the tiers of home care packages from 4 to 8 will address these specifically regional concerns. These tiers must be carefully considered to cover travel costs in particular, and they must truly reflect the time it takes to keep a home clean and the garden under control. Supported home will be underpinned by a single assessment pathway, and under this new single assessment model, non-government providers can play a role in assessing new claims for support, not just government assessors. Providers in my electorate tell me that this new system is showing real signs of promise and hope that wait times for assessments will in fact meaningfully reduce. Because it's critical here, the implementation of these changes is the bit where the rubber hits the road. For too many people in Indi, long wait lists are stopping them from getting the support they need. Even for people who do not receive a funded package, workforce shortages and a lack of suitable providers in regional towns mean it can be hard to actually get care, any care. The bill will also establish a new independent statutory complaints commissioner and expanded powers for the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission. These were key recommendations of the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety. And I support these expanded regulatory powers because unscrupulous providers and workers must be held accountable. We heard such shocking stories of abuse, neglect and violence during the Royal Commission and in the years since. The government must do more to protect vulnerable older people. A new Complaints Commissioner and expanded Quality and Safety Commission, underpinned by a new statement of rights and principles that focus on the safety, health and well-being of older people and puts them first, is indeed a good start. When I spoke to Jim Blundell, a resident of Mansfield in my electorate, he said what he wants from the new aged care system is to be listened to be heard. He wants genuine consultation with older persons to be at the heart of the new system, and he wants to feel safe to make a complaint when one is warranted. However, I share concerns of some older persons' advocacy groups that not all rights under the Act will be enforceable by the Quality and Safety Commission and the Complaints Commissioner. I'm also concerned about limited pathways for reviewing any decisions of the Complaints Commissioner. Because if an older person does not feel that the response to their complaint is sufficient, they should have fulsome review rights. I urge the Minister to consider any amendments to address this particular concern. There are further improvements that the government should make to this bill. I support calls for amendments such as strengthening whistleblower protections, which the Human Rights Law Centre and Transparency International have said are not up to scratch, and provide a worse level of protection than employees in the corporate or public sectors. I support their calls for an end to the fragmented, overlapping and inconsistent whistleblowing regime and the creation of a whistleblower protection authority. I also support, very strongly, calls for triennial reviews of the Act. It's currently set at 5 years, but as we know, that's a long time in aged care. Any unintended consequences should be looked at much, much sooner. I will pay close attention to recommendations from the Older Persons Advocacy Network and COTA Australia, and I thank them for meeting with me to discuss this bill and for their substantial and long-standing work in this area. I acknowledge that this bill is part of a broader package of reforms, many of which I hope will benefit communities in North East Victoria. While I welcome many aspects of this bill, I hear from older people and providers alike that it will do little if we cannot address workforce shortages. Regional communities in my electorate know all too well that this is often a significant contributor to the delays in our older people accessing quality, reliable, affordable aged care that they deserve. And the government must do much more to address these workforce shortages. So, in conclusion, while this bill isn't perfect, it's a significant step towards fixing our aged care system, a significant step towards learning the lessons of the Royal Commission and doing better by our mothers, our fathers, our aunts, our uncles, our brothers, sisters, our friends and neighbours. I look forward to working with the government more to improve aged care services, especially in regional Australia. I want to thank the Minister for the exceptional hard work that has taken to getting us to this point, to her staff and to the department and to the many, many people who have contributed collaboratively to this bill. And I commend this bill to the House.
I thank the member. The question is that the bill now be read a second time, and I call the member for Fadden.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and it's wonderful to be here today speaking on this bill and to have just heard from the member for Indi and to have genuine crossbench interest in this matter, as I think we all have, and to see that genuine level of interest and to see so many parts of our parliament pulling in the same direction to achieve the best possible outcome in aged care, I think is a credit to where we all are in relation to this bill. My electorate is at the northern end of the Gold Coast, and I reflect often about the ageing population that we have in my electorate, and the member for McPherson's here in the chamber today with me, and her electorate of McPherson and nearby electorate of Moncrief are all areas which have ageing populations, large retiree populations, and these issues of future need and aged care are very present in the minds of our local residents. And it's with that lens that I draw particular interest in this bill. In fact, it's often said there are only two types of people, those who live on the Gold Coast and those that want to live on the Gold Coast. And we're fortunate that many in their later life do end up having that opportunity. And we see that that retiree population ultimately will transition to needing further care. Illustrative of this, I only 2 weeks ago attended the Aged Care Australia Expo in Southport, and to see the energy and the vibrancy in that room from providers, from stakeholders, from end users, to see some of the innovation in care was actually quite impressive and incredible to see the function centre at the Southport Sharks actually filled with people who service this very much needed industry. And as we embark on this journey of this legislation and the future that it holds through future committee scrutiny and hearings and public commentary, I think it's important for all of us to reflect on what the end goal of this is, and that is very much in this bill the word care, and that care cannot happen without solid economic foundations, solid structural foundations, and support for the sector that will ensure that they're given the tools that are required to give dignity, respect, security and enjoyment for people in their later life, and to make sure that that part of life's journey is ultimately done in the best possible way. We know that our population is ageing. There's an ageing bubble, if you like, that's coming. And so it's even more critical that we get the policy settings right in this sector. I'm very proud to be part of a coalition who, when we were in government, responded with a significant funding injection to ensure that the initial response to the Royal Commission was done with some substance. And to lift the funding from $14 billion to almost $30 billion was, in my view, something that we, as an opposition and as a coalition, remain very proud of, because it started the process of how we would see change in this sector. And we literally put our money where our mouth is in ensuring that the funding was there for the care. Unfortunately, in the last year alone, we've seen 49 aged care homes closed under this Labor government, and it becomes extremely obvious that things need to change to ensure that we are providing a sustainable system that will last into the future, one that balances the needs of the care that must be provided in a dignified way, with a solid financial foundation to ensure that that is done in a sustainable way. If we keep having closures, there will be no aged care facilities left for our ageing population. And all of this, of course, is done on a background of the Royal Commission, which simply cannot be ignored. That is the background and the basis for which this legislation, and for which a new and fresh approach to aged care must be taken. And as I move around my electorate, I'm very fortunate to have been able to be guided on the concerns and importance of this issue from many of my local groups. The National Seniors Australia, whom I visit regularly, are very keenly engaged in this issue. When I visit Meals on Wheels, who provide over 30,000 meals out of Paradise Point each year, the future care needs of our ageing population is very apparent. And I must say that I'm very proud of some of the aged care facilities we have in my local area. The TriCare and the R-Care facilities, which provide extremely high levels of great aged care. But we know that there are challenges now and into the future, and that's why it is so important that we deal with this legislation in such a keen way in which we are. The opposition has provided a clear offer to work with the government because sensible aged care policies are so critically important. As I said, we need a system that is strong and sustainable for future generations. Since calling for and responding to the Royal Commission into Aged Care, Quality and Safety, the Coalition has remained resolute in advocating for the dignity and clarity that older Australians deserve. And this legislation delivers on the first recommendation of the Royal Commission, appointed by the Coalition, to implement a new right-based Aged Care Act. And as I said, we took the first steps in government, providing a massive uplift in funding to support what were very obvious as the immediate needs of the sector. But as I said, it is important that we recognise that aged care is not just a department or a sector, it's how we value and care for our elderly population. And, Deputy Speaker, it's through good faith negotiations that the Coalition has sought to ensure that any reforms provide dignity and clarity for older Australians. And we have held the government to account to finally introduce their package of reform and bring all Australians into what is a very important conversation. The issue before our aged care system is undeniable, with more than half of our aged care homes across the country operating at a financial loss, an ageing population and a very, very legitimate desire for people to age at their home where they can. The way that aged care is delivered and supported needs to change. This bill represents a significant package of reforms, which is why we have pushed for this bill to immediately be referred to the Community Affairs Legislation Committee for an inquiry. And we look forward to continuing to have an open dialogue with older Australians and the aged care sector, the stakeholders, about the government's proposed reforms through this open and transparent Senate inquiry process. Deputy Speaker, we will of course reserve our final position on this legislation until that committee delivers its final report. I'm very pleased to say, and I referred to this at the outset, that there has been cooperation in relation to this issue. And I see another crossbench member has walked into the chamber, and there has genuinely been interest and engagement on this bill from all sides of the political spectrum. And through good faith negotiations with the government, the Coalition has achieved significant changes to the government's proposed legislation that will protect the interests of older Australians and future generations. We've worked tirelessly to ensure, through a positive dialogue, that the government's reforms are fairer, particularly for Australians who have worked hard all their lives and saved for their retirement. And that is why, importantly, we pushed the government to include grandfathering arrangements, lifetime caps, a much lower taper rate, and an assurance that the federal government will remain the majority funder of aged care, not the consumer. We think all of these things, and nothing less, is what older Australians deserve. And it is through these discussions and negotiations that the bill is in its current form, and I welcome the contribution not only of the Coalition in formulating how this bill has ultimately been presented, but in the next phase of how this is aired and discussed, that we listen to Australians as to what their needs are and how they see it being delivered in a sustainable way. One of the most critical outcomes of those discussions to date have been the introduction of the grandfathering arrangements. These arrangements guarantee that Australians who are already in residential aged care on a home care package or assessed as to be on waiting for their allocated home care package will not see changes to their existing arrangements. And that is fair. In effect, it means that all Australians currently in the aged care system will not pay 1 cent more for their aged care. We also advocated for a lower taper rate towards care contributions to ensure those who have worked hard and saved for their retirement are dealt a fairer deal. The taper rates we demanded mean that funding contributions increase at a much slower rate than what the government had originally wanted. And I thank the government for their engagement, their genuine engagement on this issue. Furthermore, we sought an absolute assurance from the government that they would remain the majority funder of aged care and not the consumer. We simply cannot turn the dial that far. We also fought for and will continue to fight for the maintenance of a lifetime cap on care contributions. These caps mean that Australians will always know that the maximum they could ever be required to contribute is fixed, and again, that is only fair, that people can plan for their future. It means that a lifetime cap provides families with the peace of mind that they need when it comes to the costs associated with caring for their loved ones. In addition to these financial safeguards, the Coalition also secured an additional investment of $300 million in capital funding for regional, rural and remote aged care providers who are currently struggling to remain open under this current government. One of the benefits of being in the Coalition is that we are provided with a broad range of views, particularly those affecting rural and regional Australia. And I'm very proud of our advocacy for those people, because it doesn't matter where you live in Australia, you deserve nothing but the best. And this funding is critical for upgrading facilities that often struggle to meet the necessary standards due to financial constraints. Everyone deserves quality aged care. And so, in closing, Deputy Speaker, I welcome the approach of the government to open themselves up to the opposition for discussions and contributions in this matter. And as we move forward, the Coalition will continue to work constructively on what has been and will be a very important series of changes to the way aged care is delivered in this country.
I thank the member. The question is that the bill now be read a second time. I call the member for McKellar.
Thank you, Speaker. Before I entered Parliament, I was a general practitioner. I felt close to all my patients, of course, but I often had a really special relationship with my older patients, and I treasured the opportunity to care for them. Older people are often so beautifully skilled in the arts of conversation and connection, and they were so appreciative of the care they received. They deserve our care, our attention and our respect. So I rise today in support of the Aged Care Bill 2024. Unfortunately, it took a very long time and a royal commission for this country and this place to properly grapple with all the ways in which our aged care system has been failing older Australians. The report of the Royal Commission shocked the nation. The Royal Commissioners described it as a sad and shocking system that diminishes Australia as a nation, the story of which is a shocking tale of neglect. Our aged care system needs an overhaul, not only because of its deficiencies, it also needs an overhaul to cope with the projected increase in the number of Australians who will need its services in the future. In 2018 and 19, there was around 515,000 Australians aged 85 and older, 2% of the population. It is projected that by 2058, that number will increase to 1.5 million people, or 3.7% of the population. The corollary of this, of course, is the diminishing proportion of people, of working-age people in Australia relative to the retired proportion. In Australia in 2019, there were 4.2 working-age people for every one person aged 65 or over. And by 2058, this ratio will reduce to 3.1. The direct implication is that there will be proportionately fewer Australians both funding the aged care system and working in the aged care system. However, it is hugely important to not think of older Australians as a burden. Ageism, like so many other biases in this country, is real. The Human Rights Commission reports that more than 1 in 3 Australians aged between 55 and 64, 35% of us, have experienced age discrimination. The most common forms of discrimination reported include being turned down for a job, being ignored or treated rudely, and having disparaging jokes made about their age. More than 1 in 4 older Australians live in poverty. And we know the situation for Indigenous Australians is even worse, as they are twice as likely to live in poverty than non-Indigenous Australians. For whatever reason or cultural reason, older people do not enjoy the same levels of respect, let alone reverence, that they enjoy in Asian and African countries and the Mediterranean, and respect that they deserve. After all, Australians aged 65 years or over contribute almost $39 billion each year in unpaid caring and voluntary work. If the unpaid contribution of those aged 55 to 64 was also included, that figure rises to $74 billion per year. And if employment rates of Australians aged over 55 increased by 5%, it would add another $48 billion to our economy every year. The contribution they can make in the workplace is immense. Experience and wisdom are powerful assets in any industry. Older Australians are our mothers, our fathers, our uncles, our grandparents. Walking alongside them in their later years is a privilege. The mark of a civilised society is how they treat their most vulnerable. That's why I applaud the fact that this legislation is centred on the rights of older people, that it is based upon the rights that older people in the aged care system should expect. So what has the government already done? They've instituted 24-hour nurses in residential care and a 15% increase in the pay for aged care workers. This is a really good start to what must be a dramatic overhaul of the system. Since being elected the member of Mackellar 2.5 years ago, it has been my absolute privilege to run an electorate office that has, as one of its core functions, assisting elderly constituents and their families with the aged care system. It is unfortunate that so many people need to turn to their members of federal parliament for assistance, however. We are usually an avenue of last resort for them on a range of issues, but nevertheless it has been wonderful to watch my team ease their difficulties navigating the aged care support system. People seek our assistance in relation to all aspects of the aged care system: the Commonwealth Home Support Program, home care packages and residential care. Australians may not appreciate that while most of the national aged care budget is spent on residential aged care, more than 2/3 of the people using the aged care services do so from home. There are clear patterns or themes to the difficulties my constituents have been facing with the aged care system. These include long wait times for home care package approvals and upgrades, sometimes up to 12 months, insufficient hours of care provided through the packages, high management fees, which then reduce the available care hours, low carer allowances to families compared to the time they invest and compared to rates paid to home care package workers and providers, quality of care concerns, system inefficiencies and perceived mismanagement, inflated costs for equipment and services when billed through packages. Here are a couple of actual stories my constituents have shared with me about their experiences with the aged care system. I've changed the names of these people whose stories I am sharing. Joan's father, who has Alzheimer's, recently deteriorated while in respite care after a fall. Despite accessing physiotherapy and dementia support, Joan and her father have been waiting 9 months for his home care package to be upgraded. Joan's mother, who is elderly and struggling with the daily care of her husband, desperately needs the extra support and is putting her own safety at risk. Cynthia has been caring for her elderly mother on the Northern Beaches for years. After her mother suffered a fall and began receiving assistance through My Aged Care, Cynthia started noticing inconsistencies in the quality of service. Cleaners sent by agencies were unreliable and often unprofessional, with one alarming incident where 2 unidentified cleaners showed up unannounced, leaving her mother feeling unsafe in her own home. Despite having access to government-funded care, Cynthia and her siblings found themselves stepping in to maintain the house, take their mother to appointments and manage day-to-day tasks they knew could be done better by family members. Cynthia now wonders why family members who are already providing care out of love can't be paid through aged care packages or the Commonwealth Home Support Program to ensure a higher standard of care. And finally, Cora, who feels that aged care providers and service companies are overcharging. She was shocked by the inflated fees for physiotherapy and equipment when she booked them through her My Aged Care package, costing much more than if she had paid for them directly. Cora worries that this is an abuse of taxpayer money and is concerned about the long-term sustainability of the system if the overcharging continues. Moving now to the bill which has been introduced to address all of these issues and more. I applaud the government's adoption of the rights-based model for the provision of aged care services that has been recommended by the Royal Commission as the best way to ensure access to quality, safe and timely support, to facilitate social participation and dignity, to allow for self-determination and to provide freedom from harm, mistreatment and neglect. I completely agree that this is the appropriate framework for the bill, as do the experts. The other big changes proposed in this bill deal with the funding of the aged care services. Overall, the changes of the bill introduces will shift the funding model to a means-tested one, with co-contributions from aged care users and the Commonwealth. The changes will mean that people who can afford to pay more will pay more. I agree with this in principle because the system has become unsustainable, and with an ever-ageing population, the cost will only keep growing. It should not be contentious for people to pay for their own accommodation where they can afford to do so. If they cannot, the state steps in to assist. That is as it should be. As to accommodation costs, the maximum amount providers can charge for rooms will increase from $550,000 to $750,000, which will now be indexed. That price can be paid by residents either as a refundable lump sum, as daily payments, or as a combination of both. The lump sum payment can be made by way of a refundable accommodation deposit, an RAD. In this new bill, the RAD concept will remain in place, but those deposits will no longer be fully refundable. Providers may retain 2% of the RAD per year for a maximum of 5 years. In her second reading speech, the Minister explained that this is to ensure that residential aged care providers can attract the investment they need to keep the current facilities open and to improve quality and to build new homes. With the trend towards an ageing population, new wings and new facilities will need to be built to accommodate greater numbers of people requiring care. Experts, including Professor Cathy Eager from the Uni of New South Wales, noted that there is no corresponding requirement that any of this additional funding providers will receive. Profits they will make must be spent on more or better services for residents. This is a missed opportunity. It seems a balance could have been struck between increased profits to aged care providers and the care and service that those providers were required to provide to their residents. What I think is absolutely critical to note is the stipulation in the bill that aged care users will pay no contribution to the cost of their clinical or medical care. This is indeed fundamental to the objective of universal access to medical and health care. This is partly so that individual contributions can be targeted to services that support people's independence and everyday living costs, such as cleaning, gardening and accommodation. It is also welcome that there will be a lifetime contribution cap on non-clinical care contributions of $130,000 or cessation of contributions after 4 years. And finally, there is a no worse off guarantee so that people already in or assessed as needing home care or already in residential care won't make a greater contribution to their care than they have already planned for. Unfortunately, what constitutes clinical care, independent support and everyday living support are not included in this bill, but will be contained in the rules. At this stage, therefore, it's hard to properly assess the extent to which people soon to enter care will be worse off under the new funding model. Advocacy groups like the Older Persons Advocacy Network are concerned about the lack of detail here. They are sensibly calling for modelling which will enable them to properly understand the real impact on self-funded retirees. This lack of detail, lack of clarity also makes it difficult to decide whether to support the bill at the point that it comes before the House for a vote. It is akin to the government again saying, just trust us. In summary, I support the aims of this bill. The system must be made sustainable and our elderly population must get the standard of care they deserve. And the aim of universal access is critical. It is not perfect, but it is progress. I will continue to advocate for the government to continue their efforts to improve our aged care system and support its residents. I commend the bill to the House. Thank you.
I thank the member. The question is that the bill now be read a second time, and I call the member for Wannon.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. And I saw how important aged care is last week in my electorate. I visited the Eventide Lutheran home, and they gathered at the Lutheran home for morning tea. There was about 50 of the residents, and they asked me to have a word with them, which I did, and then we went to Q&A. Well, I've got to say it was like question time and a bit more. They had questions on everything for me. And to see all the residents come together like that with some of the staff, with the manager, you really saw an example of what aged care can provide to the community. And it was wonderful to see. And can I say to all those aged care providers right across my electorate, thank you for what you do, because having good aged care providers in our country communities, in our country towns, is just so important, because it means that our residents can age where they've lived. It means that we can provide employment through our aged care sector, and it means that the community can visit their loved ones, the elderly, and they don't have to travel to do it. And that's why it's so important that we get any changes to our aged care system right. And Deputy Speaker, just while I'm talking about great community events, it'd be remiss of me not to mention another community event I also did last week. I called in and saw the Hamilton View Club ladies who were putting a luncheon on. They were having a luncheon which they do once a month to raise funds for the Smith family, to Smith Family Learning for Life students. And they've been doing that now, I think, for well over 45 years. And it's wonderful what these ladies are doing for the community. And to give you a sense as to the contribution they've made, some of these students, Learning for Life students that they've helped, have now grown up and they are mentoring students through Standing Tall, a wonderful mentoring program in my electorate. And that just goes to show what our wonderful volunteer organisations can do. So I'll just take this moment to give a big shout out to the Hamilton View Club ladies and thank you for what you do on behalf of our community. Now, getting back to this aged care bill, as I mentioned, that visit to the Eventide Lutheran Aged Care Facility just really brought home to me how important it is that we get these reforms right. And obviously the Coalition, after commissioning the Royal Commission report, said to the government that we want to work with you in a bipartisan way so that after the Royal Commission we can get the reforms right that are needed for our aged care sector. And what was detailed in the Royal Commission showed that there was the need for us to be able to change the way the aged care system works in this country, and especially for us to be able to have a look at what we can do is about this new right-based aged care approach. And that's why we have the new Right-Based Aged Care Act. And that was incredibly important. And we have continued to honour that commitment of working in a bipartisan way with the government to get this right. And so the government came to the Coalition and detailed some changes that they wanted to make. We have obviously looked at that and said, we think that you actually need to make changes to the approach that you're taking, and especially what we have argued very strongly for is to make sure that the funding for rural and regional Australia is right. Because you have to remember the advantages that aged care provision has in the city versus those in regional and rural Australia. And so this was a real focus of ours to make sure that we get it right. And as part of those discussions, the Coalition was able to secure $300 million in additional capital funding through the Aged Care Capital Assistance Program for regional, rural and remote aged care providers to upgrade their facilities, as well as additional care funding, particularly for regional, rural and remote care homes. Targeted support for rural, regional and remote aged care homes was not included in the government's initial proposal, and that's why this was absolutely vital. And as I know for a lot of my aged care providers in my electorate of Wannon, what has happened over a period of time is it's always been the community that has sought to fund a lot of our not-for-profit providers through lots of volunteer hours, because they know how important it is that people can age in the community where they live. But given the expense and the expense through regulation, everything that's been added to aged care provision, it's now getting harder and harder for local communities to be able to support, especially capital upgrades to facilities. So that's why this additional $300 million that we've got for these capital upgrades is going to be so important going forward. And it also is going to be crucial that we understand that providing the care that's needed in regional and rural remote areas, providing that care sometimes comes at additional cost. So we've got to make sure that built in the system is a recognition of that, so that whether it be for nurse provision or any other provision, that our aged care providers in rural Australia get the additional assistance that they need. Now, the government has listened to us and has made adjustments, especially when it comes to the provision in regional and rural Australia. And from the aged care providers that I've been speaking to in my electorate, they say from the headlines that have been detailed so far, the changes that are being proposed through this package look okay. But once again, they do want some more detail. And that's why we continue to reserve our final position on this bill until this package and this legislation goes for a proper Senate inquiry. And once that inquiry hands down its report, will be a lot clearer as to what adjustments still need to be made to this bill. Now, one of the things which has been mentioned previously, for instance, is how much is going to be put in regulations versus how much is in the legislation itself. And until we know what exactly is going to be in the regulations and how it's going to be framed, that can cause some uncertainty as to what is going to be the final details and the impacts that these aged care reforms might possibly have. So we have to make sure that we get it right. Now, there's a few things that we also have insisted on, which I think are really important. We insisted on grandfathering. So everyone who's in the system, everyone who has begun the process of entering the system, are not going to have the rules changed on them. So they can rest easy knowing that these changes will not impact on them. And that is incredibly important, because a lot of families are doing it tough. And a lot of families are doing it tough in trying to provide the aged care support for their elderly loved ones. And they don't need changes which upset the apple cart, because a lot of them have planned meticulously to enable their loved ones to be able to getting the support that they need. And so the last thing we want to be doing is pulling the rug from under them, especially given the cost of living crisis, cost of doing business crisis, that so many people are facing at this moment. The other thing that we fought for is a much fairer deal for hard-working Australians, for those people who are struggling to make ends meet at the moment. We wanted to make sure that there was the inclusion of a much lower taper rate to ensure equitable contributions for Australians who have worked hard all their lives. And that was something, obviously, that we impressed upon the government as well. We also fought for the maintenance of a lifetime cap on care contributions across both residential and home care to provide certainty to families as they're thinking about, okay, what could be the final financial contribution that we need to make. And importantly, and I know this is important because this is one of the largest pieces of feedback that I got from my aged care provider boards. Now, you've got to remember, in regional and rural Australia, and it's one of the things that I love about regional and rural Australia, is you get volunteers. You get volunteers that go on the not-for-profit boards of our aged care facilities because they understand how important they are. So they're prepared to give up their time to make sure that aged care provision continues in our community, whether it be Casterton, Hamilton, whether it be in Warrnambool, whether it be in Portland, whether it be in Camperdown, whether it be in Ararat, whether it be in Colac. Right across the board, we've got people volunteering to make sure there is aged care provision. Now, the idea that these people, all volunteers, could face criminal penalties for circumstances which may be completely out of their control was, I think, the wrong approach to take. And a lot of the feedback I got was the people who were volunteering on those boards said, well, given the high regulatory environment of aged care, why would you volunteer if a mistake could end up with you in jail? And I think it's a very, very perfect change, this removal of criminal penalties, because otherwise what would have happened is these volunteers would have said, well, sorry, we're not going to volunteer anymore on these boards. And then you wouldn't have aged care provision in our communities. And you have to remember, the vast, vast majority of people who provide that aged care provision, whether it be in Mortlake, whether it be in Winchelsea, whether it be in Lorne, Apollo Bay, and all those other facilities that I've mentioned, they are provided from people who want to do the right thing. And I think it made absolutely common sense to make sure that they wouldn't face criminal penalties. The other thing that we fought very hard to remove was something called the worker voice. Now, what this was all about was about forcing unions into every aged care home in the country. Now, you have to understand what this would mean, especially once again for these not-for-profits that I'm talking about. If all of a sudden they're dealing with unions' right for entry, unions dictating to them everything that needs to happen in an aged care facility, these boards, which have wonderful volunteers and the staff that are doing a wonderful job caring for our elderly, all of a sudden would see their workplaces upturned through the unions marching in the front door. So taking out what was called nefariously the worker voice was also incredibly important. And I think what it means is, and once again we've got to have this inquiry, but what it means is that this bill is in a far better place than what it was when the coalition started discussions with the government. Now, obviously, we've still got a long way to go because there is that inquiry and the feedback that comes from that inquiry, and we'll be making sure that we interrogate this legislation fully. But the recommendations that come back from that inquiry are going to be really, really important to making the final decision on our side as to whether ultimately we can support this legislation or not. But the fact that it has been improved considerably by that extra $300 million by taking out the worker voice, by making sure that those working Australians who have worked hard all their lives can have certainty around what they're going to be paying when it comes to aged care and more, have made this bill better. But we'll wait and see what comes out of the inquiry to see what our final position will be.
I give the call to the member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It's always a privilege to talk about aged care in the chamber and our older Australians and the care that they are given. And of course I have many providers in my electorate at Moncrieff on the Gold Coast, and I do enjoy regularly visiting those residential care homes, and I always look forward to chatting with the elderly residents about their concerns, and I look forward to doing that next week, where I'll be visiting a few in the Nerang area of my electorate. And whilst we're talking about aged care, it's also about in-home care that we're discussing. But I just would like to say hello to those residents across Moncrieff in all of the aged care facilities, and those at homesteads in Nerang particularly, and of course Earl Haven, which has some assisted living units there, and I'll be visiting there next week with the state candidate for Gaven, Bianca Stone, who is running for that seat at the state election, and she's an incredible person with a great history and will be a remarkable MP, I'm sure, in the next Queensland Parliament. So shout out to all of those, and I look forward to meeting you again next week. But we can all recognise the importance, of course, of a strong, dignified and world-class aged care system that supports all older Australians now and into the future. And when I think about the baby boomer generation, or when I even think about my grandparents, my grandmother was in an aged care home in Adelaide for some years, and I visited her a number of times, and the care that she received from the workers in that environment who cared so deeply about her in her last years. And now, of course, my own family, my father's getting to that age, and my aunts and uncles are getting to that age where they might be looking at getting some in-home care assistance, or certainly lean on the services and providers that are around the country. So this is an important area that, of course, needs reform, and the Coalition has been working closely to try to improve this bill. But with more than half of aged care homes across the country currently operating at a loss, an ageing population and a growing desire to age at home, there is definitely a need for that sector reform that I talked about, because we need a system that provides dignity and clarity for older Australians. And this legislation delivers on the first recommendation of the Royal Commission appointed by the Coalition to implement a new right-based aged care Act. And in response to the Royal Commission, I'll note, Deputy Speaker, that the former Coalition government provided more than $18 billion in funding to support the immediate needs of the sector, and I recall Minister Hunt at the time, who was the minister, and the fantastic job that he did with his 4 key pillars for the aged care sector reform, and of course the funding that went along with that, and I congratulate him on his previous work that he's done. And I also congratulate Senator Ruston, who has done so much work on this particular bill that's before the House, in working with the government to make it a much better bill. And while it's not perfect, it's much better than it was. The Coalition provided a clear offer to work with the government on sensible aged care policies, because we need a system that's strong and sustainable to support future generations. And that's probably my generation. I see a member for Bass is there, our generation, who's probably next after our parents, of course. And so this, of course, is something that's so important to a large proportion of our population and their families. And I just want to be clear about this package, because these are Labor's reforms, and this has not been co-designed by the Coalition. And so whilst we have been able to make some changes, we're still not 100% on Labor's package, but the Coalition has worked tirelessly to ensure that the government's reforms are fairer, particularly for Australians who have worked hard all their lives to save for their retirement. And of course, all of our families have worked very hard throughout their lives and paid their taxes, and then in their twilight years they must be looked after. I want to commend the work again of my colleague Senator Ruston for her efforts and negotiating on this bill and making sure that we were able to fight for the inclusion of grandfathering arrangements to ensure that every Australian who's already commenced their journey of ageing, well, all of us have commenced that, haven't we, Deputy Speaker? Nobody's getting any younger day by day, and so it's only a matter of time before a larger proportion of the population have to lean on the aged care sector for that support and help. But we've already commenced, for those Australians who've already commenced their journey of ageing within the Commonwealth system, will not be impacted by these changes. And I think that's a really important point, to make sure that there is a grandfathering applied to this so that there is certainty across the sector moving forward. So that means that older Australians who are currently in the system, including those on home care wait list, will not pay 1 cent more for their aged care journey. So that delivers certainty where there was none before with this package. A fairer deal for hardworking Australians ensured the inclusion of a much lower taper rate to ensure equitable contributions for Australians who have worked hard all their lives to save for their retirement, and an assurance that the federal government will remain the majority funder of aged care, not the consumer. And I think that's also a very important point. As I said, I've watched my parents work their whole lives and pay their taxes, and they should be looked after when they're on the pension, particularly looked after well, and that's so very important that that assurance is there as our population ages. Because for older Australians, as I said, who have paid their taxes and done the work, many of them don't have the benefit of superannuation either, and I think that's really important to highlight. And so they don't have that that nest egg to lean on in retirement, or when they need to go into a home where they have that support and assistance, or indeed where they need in-home care. So that certainty for families who've got loved ones in care for many years, as well as the inclusion of a time-limited cap for residential aged care to ensure that older Australians and their families will only be required to contribute to care costs for 4 years. The government's original proposal saw no cap on home care and a $184,000 cap on residential aged care only. And so we gained the concession that no older Australian will ever pay more than $130,000 for home care and the non-clinical care in residential care combined. So these were concessions that Senator Anne Ruston and the Coalition were able to negotiate for a better deal for our older Australians. We secured $300 million in additional capital funding through the Aged Care Capital Assistance Program for regional, rural and remote aged care providers to upgrade their facilities, along with additional care funding for regional, rural and remote aged care home, because it's unsurprising that the Labor government included no targeted support for rural, regional and remote aged care homes in its initial proposal, because regional and remote and rural Australia is not on the government's mind. The government is chasing the city vote, not the regional vote, and that's why it wasn't included in this package, because the Labor government doesn't care about regional Australians. It's the LNP, the Liberal and National parties, who care deeply about regional Australia, and so that is why we delivered that in this package. We strongly push for the removal of criminal penalties from the bill, following serious concerns that their inclusion would force the exit of highly capable staff from the sector in fear of being criminally punished to a level not seen in any other industry. You should not be going to work in fear of a criminal penalty unless you have committed a criminal act, of course. And so we've removed that, managed to remove that from the government's package of bills here. The government wanted aged care workers and even volunteers to be criminally liable under the new Act. So we fought hard for the changes to make sure that Australians who've worked hard all their lives to save for their retirement are dealt a much fairer deal. Coalition strongly believes the government needs to be talking with older Australians, speaking with the stakeholders, their families, speaking with the sector, bringing them to the table and taking them on the journey of aged care reform, because they are very substantial reforms to the sector. They've been excluded from this conversation for far too long, and that's why we fought for an open and transparent Senate committee inquiry, which will, of course, bring out all the questions and bring the stakeholders to the table to ask the questions that they would like of the government for what they are doing in terms of reforms across the sector and what implications that has for aged care facilities, for their residents, for their workers and for their families as well. So we strongly encourage anyone to participate in this inquiry process to make sure that your views are heard, to make sure that the government listens to your views, and this is the opportunity during the Senate inquiry to do that. We look forward to now having this open conversation with older Australians and the aged care sector about the government's proposed reforms through that Senate inquiry process, and we welcome the views of Australians to put them forward, asking the government, of course, many, many questions about the future of aged care in this country. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Wentworth.
Deputy Speaker, today I rise to speak in support of the new Aged Care Act, a bill that, while no silver bullet, marks a step towards rebuilding the structure, reputation and sustainability of Australia's aged care system. I congratulate the government for bringing this bill forward, and I commend the Coalition for their constructive engagement in the process and helping build a robust piece of legislation. I was recently invited to visit an aged care facility in my electorate to mark the awarding of an Order of Australia to a resident, Kalman Block. And please indulge me for a moment while I commend Kalman and his family for the contribution he's made in my community over many, many years. He's been a Lions member for the last 50 years, and that was why he was recommended and awarded the Order of Australia. And his commitment to his community and his commitment to volunteering and just helping people in times of need was remarkable. And it was wonderful to be able to celebrate that with his daughter and grandchildren as well. Daughter, grandchildren, and actually great-grandchild as well. So very, very special event. It was, as I said, at an aged care facility. And during that visit, I spent about an hour or so with residents and with staff. And I was struck by the genuine decency, humanity and connection that was shared between staff and residents. What I witnessed was genuine compassion and care, and that is what all of us seek and want for our families. We all fear ageing, of gradually losing our faculties and independence that we take for granted for so much of our lives. We also fear becoming dependent, whether it is on a spouse, friends, carers or our children. A well-functioning aged care sector is a critical part of our social security safety net and provides assurances that the worst of ageing can be managed with dignity, respect and compassion. But I fear in recent years we have lost faith in that safety net. The need for reform has never been clearer. The Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety painted a harrowing picture of the failings of our current system. It showed us that too many older Australians have suffered not just from poor service, but from neglect and in some cases even abuse. The stories that emerged from the Royal Commission were heartbreaking. We heard of elderly residents left in soiled clothing, of people going days without adequate food. It revealed the human cost of allowing the system to drift away from a model of care concentrated on the rights of individuals, their wishes and autonomy. COVID-19 further exposed the fragility of the sector to external shocks. It showed us that the system was stretched to capacity and unable to adapt to a crisis, leaving both residents and aged care workers at significant health risk. When I speak to care providers in my electorate, they talk about the challenges they have to deliver the growing need in my community, but also communities around the country. The challenges in building more facilities, more wings, providing more beds, but also the challenges of getting the staff and the right staff in to support this incredibly important work. And this, and I think certainly as a daughter who's recently lost two parents, one of whom was desperately afraid of going into aged care facilities, that fear that many of our community have, that they will not have the facilities in place, and they will have to move to other parts of the country where they do not have the same connections to friends and families that they do in their local environment, is a real concern.
That is so true.
And I also, just speaking briefly on Wentworth, one of the things that startled me the most is that the aged care provider, who was a provider of many aged care facilities around the country, said they have as much problem getting aged care workers in Wentworth as they do in some rural electorates because of the enormous cost of living and cost of housing in communities like mine. So there are some really significant challenges in the sector. We need to be honest, however, that the sector has been failing. It has failed residents, it has failed its staff, and it has failed its community. But when I go into aged care home and when I go into and talk to other aged care providers, I think that there's a really important reminder that the majority of the sector is deeply committed to the preservation of dignity and quality of life for elderly Australians. The system has been broken, but it is not beyond repair, and I think this bill goes some distance to do that, which brings me to it. As I said, I commend the government for working closely with stakeholders and with members across the parliament to produce a bill that has received broad support from the sector and aged care community representatives. There are still some areas to strengthen, and a significant part of this bill is actually in regulation. But stakeholders I have spoken to have acknowledged the improvements to this bill since the exposure draft. It is clear, that the government and others have been listening to the voices of those most affected by these issues, older Australians, their families and workers. And once again, I commend the opposition, the coalition, for their engagement, and areas where I know that my community does appreciate the changes that were made based on the opposition's feedback. This bill represents a substantial overhaul in the way that aged care is provided in Australia, explicitly legislating a rights-based model that acknowledges every Australian's right to age with dignity. It also introduces revised funding arrangements that acknowledge the roles of both home care and residential care in addressing both capacity constraints, as well as the wishes and needs of elderly Australians. This new rights-based framework is grounded in the principle that older Australians should be able to access quality, safe and timely care, and was a key recommendation of the Royal Commission. However, as a number of organisations have pointed out, these rights are not enforceable under the Act and will rely on the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission and Complaints Commissioner to ensure that these rights are upheld. The Aged Care Act provides civil penalties for infringements on registered provider obligations, and this is, I think, a really important part of the Act. I know that there is some concern that these don't go far enough, but I also recognise that we need to find the right balance here to make sure that we are working constructively with our aged care providers and ensure that bad actors have always face the full force of the law, but recognise that there are many people and many in the sector who are working constructively and genuinely to improve quality of care and look after their residents in an effective way. And so we need to strike that right balance. The funding arrangements proposed in this legislation appear to be sensible adjustments to the current user pay system, although I note that the community eagerly awaits the release of the rules that will actually determine the individual fees that will be charged. The bill maintains a means-tested co-contribution system based on services need with different funding arrangements, subject to whether required services is considered clinical care, independent support and everyday living. This co-contribution model has caused some concern that the service quality of aged care will become dependent on ability to pay, and while the government has noted incentives for providers to provide ratios of supported residents, this is not mandated, and this is an area we do need to closely monitor. There are provisions that allow for a more sustainable sector, such as allowing services to obtain up to 2% of the refundable accommodation deposits, which the sector has been requesting for some time. This will have an enormous impact on the ability for services in my community to expand, grow and invest. And I want to briefly note why this is important, and actually kind of why the whole legislation is important. Our community is ageing. The great joy and the great benefit of this is that Australians are living longer and have a greater chance of living healthier lives longer in our country. But we also need to recognise the impact that has and the greater older Australians that it has on our sort of tax system and on our ability to fund the services that are most important. You know, back in the 1970s and 80s, there used to be 6 younger Australians, working age Australians, for every older Australian over the age of 65. This is now under 4, and in the expectation in another generation, you know, this will just be under 3. So we do know that the community is ageing, and so the burden and the cost of actually providing quality services is going to increase, and we do need to face how we're going to pay for that, and pay for that in a way, you know, that burdens, you know, shares the burden appropriately across different generations and across different people's ability to pay. And so I do acknowledge that this bill goes some way to trying to address that in a way that is fair, particularly for those people who are already in the aged care system and have made their plans, but also is thinking forward. A key part of the legislation, which I'm really happy to see, is the emphasis on home care. Now, you know, when I talk to people in Wentworth who have had engagement in the aged care system, this is one of the things they talk to me the most about, is like how difficult it is to get home care in a timely way. You know, when you're assessed for a package or on a waiting list, you know, by the time you actually get the package, you're often significantly more unwell, have not been able to get the services you need right now to support yourself. And this can often precipitate having to go into aged care, where potentially, had you got the right services in your home when you needed them, you wouldn't have needed to do this. And so I think this emphasis on home care is really important. This bill will introduce greater flexibility, allowing older Australians to receive early interventions and a higher level of support, including services like meal preparation, cleaning and personal care, with an easier transition between different levels of care when needed. I also commend the government for expanding the end-of-life care pathways to allow more people to access palliative care in their home. And again, on a personal level, having seen my father go through palliative care, and him having actually had the great benefit of having a wonderful palliative care team that he relied on very much in the end of his life, it is really important that we acknowledge the importance that palliative care can provide, you know, individuals and their families at end of life, and also give people a chance to die at home, as many would like to, but many fewer actually ever reach that aspiration. But apart from the integrated assessment pathways, I still hold some concerns about the wait times to receive some of these home care supports. When an older person, as I said, is deteriorating, receiving timely care is absolutely essential. And I would ask the government to more explicitly address this issue in their work and in their future legislation. I would also like to acknowledge that a significant amount of the reform will be delivered through delegated legislation. And while I understand the need for the bill to pass quickly to implement these much-needed changes by next year, I know that the community eagerly awaits closer scrutiny of the aged care rules, which include the final quality standards, code of conduct, and how fees will be calculated. And again, this bill is a positive step towards a better model of aged care in Australia, but the market-based model means that the success of this legislation hinges critically on the ability of providers to provide adequate services, not to mention, you know, addressing once again the issue I've identified earlier, which is the shortage of aged care workers. You know, currently the Centre for Economic Development estimated in 2021 that we'd have a shortage of aged care workers of 110,000 by 2030. You know, bills that legislate rights and standards are promising, but unless we have a suitable and sustainable workforce, the standard of care and quality of care for aged care residents are likely to continue to be unmet. And this is an issue I mentioned before, how much this affects my community in Wentworth, where the chronic shortage of aged care workers means that, you know, aged care providers, you know, can't expand in the way that they would like to in my community, and are really concerned about their ability to continue to attract great aged care workers. You know, and I am concerned, I'll be honest, that the government isn't doing enough in this area. Firstly, I want to outline that while they have brought in a migration policy to attract aged care workers from overseas, my great concern with that model is that it is tied up into basically an agreement between the aged care workers and the unions, is only the way that those special fast-track visas can be accessed. And, you know, I have real concerns on that because many of the providers I've spoken to do not have those union links at the moment and would like to be able to work with other groups such as Fair Work or other government institutions to be able to access these workers without having to necessarily, you know, agree to all the requirements that the unions impose on them, because in some cases they feel that this is, you know, unnecessary or onerous. And I am concerned that their migration settings are not yet pulling that way. And I think the other issue I always come back to is that this place and we as parliamentarians, we're very good at imposing obligations on businesses, and in aged care it's absolutely critical. But we should also be constantly thinking about how do we make sure that, are we right-sizing the sort of burdens that we put on individuals, on care providers? How to make sure that we can still allow for innovation, for growth and productivity in sectors like aged care, because this is an increasing part of our economy. How do we make sure that, when that you, particularly for our frontline workers, that they are spending time on the care they want to give rather than on paperwork and bureaucracy. I used to work in a hospital, I've worked in education, and the feedback I got from the nurses, from the doctors, from the teachers, from the principals was consistently that they were spending less and less time on the things that mattered to them most and why they got into the sector in the first place, which is their desire to provide care and education to people, and they're spending more and more time on bureaucracy. And I think, the aspiration, I think, of every government needs to be constantly right-sizing this, constantly coming back and saying, is this regulation, it's there for protection, but are there other ways of providing those protections while still giving people the flexibility and also unburdening the frontline workers so that they can do what they do best, which is provide care and education to those who need it. So in conclusion, Deputy Speaker, while I believe that this bill represents a good reform and a significant step forward, there is still further to go. We must continue to push for greater investment in the workforce in particular, address long wait times for care, ensure the reforms are implemented in a way that truly benefits older Australians, but also allows innovation and productivity growth in the sector. Thank you.
And I call, in the few minutes we have left of the Fed Chamber, the member for Riverina.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Last sitting week, the Albanese Labor government introduced its new Aged Care Bill 2024 to the Parliament, and we, as the coalition opposition, think that it's right that it ought to go to the Senate Community Affairs Legislation Committee for inquiry. It is, as you can tell, as you can see, there's a lot of pages to this. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. It is an improvement, but there is still a long, long way to go. Late last year, I held a roundtable with aged care providers throughout the Riverina and Central West, and they expressed to me their deep concerns about the aged care sector. They are at the forefront of what is seen by them, by residents and by many in society as to be a failing system. And it's become a whole lot worse under this Labor government. The roundtable that I had originally came about after discussions with John Knight, the chair of Uralba Hostel, Gundagai. And Gundagai, like many communities in my electorate, and indeed many country centres, has an ageing population. Rural and regional Australia, in many places, there are ageing populations in those centres, and people are desperately worried that when they reach that time of life when they can no longer look after themselves, that there won't be a bed, a place for them in the community in which they've lived for most, if not all, their lives. And it is simply not right, not fair, not equitable, and indeed even economical that they just get shipped away, in many cases hundreds and hundreds of kilometres away from loved ones, family and friends, away from the communities that they love and cherish. They're left to spend their twilight years, what should be their golden years, in communities which are foreign to them. And this is of particular concern in rural and regional Australia. I was interested to hear the member for Wentworth express the same view. And she is very much in the largest city in Australia, And if it's an issue in Sydney, then it's certainly going to be an issue in rural and regional Australia. And remote Australia, it's going to be even worse. And to that end, I was particularly aggrieved by the fact that initially, Labor did not intend to have funding for rural and regional Australia committed as part of this Act. The Coalition secured $300 million in additional capital funding through the Aged Care Capital Assistance Program for regional, rural and remote aged care providers to upgrade facilities. And this was in addition to additional care funding, particularly for aged care homes throughout country Australia. And this is important, this is necessary, this is vital. Targeted support for rural, regional and remote aged care homes was not included in the government's initial proposal. And
did you want to finish your sentence, Member for Riverina?
I'd only said the word "and," but I can. I'm in your hands, Speaker.
Okay, time is interrupted. Unfortunately, the member for Riverina, the member for Riverina will be given leave. Be given the opportunity to continue his remarks at a later date. The debate will be made in order of the next sitting. And I call the member for Lingiari.
Deputy Speaker, I move that the Federation Chamber do now adjourn.
Is there a seconder?
In the motion.
The question is that the motion be agreed to, and I call the member for Clark.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I've long argued that Australia should adopt a more independent foreign and security policy, which is not to say that we shouldn't have allies or be a member of alliances, but rather that at all times we should put our national interest first and only team up with other countries if doing so is genuinely in our national interest. To that end, it was arguably not unreasonable for Prime Minister John Howard to invoke ANZUS after the 11 September 2001 terrorist attacks, considering the value for Australia at the time of demonstrating our support for the US and bolstering our own security posture. By contrast, it was clearly not in our national interest to stay mired in Afghanistan for decades, or to join the United States and United Kingdom when they invaded Iraq in 2003. Iraq in particular was a failure of foreign and security policy of historic proportions, a disaster made all the more appalling by the undeniable fact that the war was based on a litany of lies. Now, of course, the Howard government would have argued in 2003 that our relationship with the US was so important that Australia had no choice than to go along for the ride. But Canada didn't, and the world didn't open up and swallow it. Nor did the US abandon Five Eyes partner New Zealand when it also refused to join in the invasion. In other words, Deputy Speaker, the Australian government had options in 2003, but chose to put the US's national interest ahead of our own. So what then is to be made of the recent diplomatic relationship between Australia, India, Japan and the US, known as the Quad? Or more importantly, of AUKUS, the highly controversial security relationship binding Australia, the UK and the US? Well, in my opinion, they're not inherently bad for Australia so far as they promise international cooperation among like-minded countries. But of course, this is a somewhat intellectual take on the situation. And the reality of AUKUS is that there is good reason for many people to be alarmed with the consequences of the agreement. For a start, AUKUS is mostly about nuclear submarines, and nuclear submarines are the wrong technology for our needs, not least because they are big, relatively noisy and unsuited to the shallow waters of Southeast Asia. Sure, nuclear boats are fast, go deep and enjoy remarkable endurance, but all the pumps, steam, turbines and reduction gears normally involved in nuclear propulsion make a racket compared to a conventional boat. Frankly, it would have made much more sense for the US and UK to continue to focus on nuclear, while Australia continued with niche capabilities like improved conventional submarines and autonomous underwater vehicles. Frankly, that would have been in the best interests of all three countries. Such a future would guarantee that Australia maintains a sovereign underwater warfighting capability, something that will effectively be denied to us if our submarine fleet hardware, software and crew are all entangled in the US and UK nuclear submarine architecture. To suggest that the US will sell us Virginia-class submarines and not be fussed about when and if we operate them is just a fantasy. And then there's the cost, which by one estimate is put at more than $1/3 of $1 trillion over the next 30 years. This is not just an awful lot of money in its own right. It's also so much money as to gut funding for other capabilities as the submarines skew capability towards expeditionary coalition operations in far-flung corners of the world. Assuming, of course, that the Royal Australian Navy can find enough crews, which is an heroic assumption, seeing as they don't have enough crews for the much smaller Collins-class boats in service currently. And all of this has been thrust upon the Australian community with no public consultation and not even a parliamentary debate, despite the enormity of the philosophical shift in the country's position on nuclear energy and all the attendant questions about opportunity cost, safety, waste and so on. This is an appalling failure of governance, made all the worse by the then Labor opposition's obsequious response to the coalition government's shock announcement that Australia is getting a nuclear navy. So that's where I land on this one, Deputy Speaker. More nuanced than many people, especially those not schooled in strategic matters and defence capability. But then again, I did enjoy more than 2 decades in the military and intelligence establishments. Thanks, Deputy Speaker.
I call the Assistant Minister for Mental Health and Suicide Prevention, Rural and Regional Health.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Before the introduction of Medicare, the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in Australia was unpaid medical bills. 1 in 7 Australians at the time had no medical coverage. That's why Gough Whitlam introduced Medibank, which at the time was strongly opposed and eventually scrapped by the Liberals, before being reintroduced as Medicare under Bob Hawke. In the 40 years since, Australians have largely had access to affordable and timely health care. But over the last decade, under the former Liberal government, we saw Medicare come under attack. As Health Minister, the Leader of the Opposition froze the bulk billing incentive for 6 long years. And when we came to government, bulk billing was in free fall. Since then, we've been working to strengthen Medicare. Deputy Speaker, our record $3.5 billion investment to triple the bulk billing incentive has seen bulk billing rates not only steady, but begin to rise. Across the country, we've seen 5 million more GP visits bulk billed. And in my community on the Central Coast of New South Wales, we've seen a 7.7% increase in bulk billing, with 77.4% of all visits now bulk billed in Dobell. As a pharmacist, I also know how important affordable medicines are. Labor introduced the PBS, and now we've made medicines more affordable through 60-day prescriptions and by freezing the maximum PBS co-payment. We've also opened 2 Medicare urgent care clinics on the Central Coast, including the Lake Haven Medicare Urgent Care Clinic, which I visited with Minister Butler last week, which has seen more than 10,000 visits since opening in December last year. Fully bulk billed care for urgent but not life-threatening conditions, 7 days a week over extended hours. Deputy Speaker, and the response from my community has been really heartening. Marion from Warnervale said, "After experiencing a deep cut on my hand, I sought treatment at the Medicare Urgent Care Clinic at Lake Haven. From reception through to treatment, the care I received was brilliant. I am grateful to have had access to professional and prompt care so close to home." Marion's experience has been reflected by almost 10,000 other locals on the Central Coast. We've seen at the UCCs that 1 in 3 visits are children under 15 and more than a quarter are presenting on weekends, showing this is a trusted alternative to the emergency department for local families. Deputy Speaker, and now we're putting mental health at the heart of Medicare, acknowledging today World Mental Health Day. We're opening a kids hub in Tuggerah, which will deliver mental health, emotional and developmental support for young children and their families. We've expanded and enhanced Lake Haven Headspace and opened a new Headspace in my hometown of Wyong, providing support and care across the 4 key pillars of Headspace. 20-year-old Lily detailed her Headspace journey, saying, I first visited Headspace in 2019 after opening up to my dad about how I'd been feeling. I confessed that I'd been feeling depressed, anxious, and engaging in unhelpful coping strategies. I was afraid to ask for help and initially felt like I was a failure. However, little did I know that by taking that first scary step, it would completely change my life. 5 years later, and now not only can I say I'm in a much healthier headspace, but I'm also proud to be a member of the Headspace Wyong Youth Reference Group. And yesterday we marked National Headspace Day. The 2 local Headspace services in my community are supporting hundreds of local young people like Lily on the northern end of the Central Coast of New South Wales. And now, in adult mental health, our new Tuggerah Medicare Mental Health Centre is offering free walk-in mental health support and care from a multidisciplinary team, wraparound support, including a social worker, psychologist and a peer support worker. Nationally, we're opening 61 Medicare mental health centres across the country, bringing mental health into the heart of Medicare, providing free walk-in support and care closer to home for people when they need it most. And Deputy Speaker, we recently opened the new Veteran and Family Hub in Wyong, which offers connection and support to more than 8,000 veterans on the Central Coast and their families. Deputy Speaker, from physical health to mental health, we're strengthening Medicare to deliver better and more affordable healthcare for everyone on the Central Coast and across the country. Labor is the party that created Medicare. We're the party that created the pharmaceutical benefits scheme. We have always fought for Medicare and universal healthcare, despite the attacks from the other side to try to dismantle it. And Deputy Speaker, we always will.
Call the member for Menzies.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I rise to talk about an institution in my electorate that is dearly valued, and it is our Neighbourhood Watch. Recently, I've been door-knocking in my electorate, and the top 3 issues are cost of living, housing and crime. We have seen an uptick in crime in my neighbourhoods, particularly aggravated burglaries. And aggravated burglaries are not just another property crime, they're a crime where a person is home and where the sanctity and safety of a family is threatened. And I have seen CCTV footage of people violently breaking through front doors to steal car keys and other valuables. So when I met with the Neighbourhood Watch, I wanted to thank them for the work that they do in keeping our community safe. I met with Jeff Glute, Angie Liu, Ian Morris, Herman Harberts, and they wanted me to stress that it's all the volunteers in the Neighbourhood Watch that make a difference. In fact, Deputy Speaker, it is one of the largest neighbourhood watches in Australia. And recently, they have been giving up their own time to help our community and inform them. They have been doing letterboxing in Templestowe, delivering crime prevention pamphlets. They have been running a campaign to prevent motor vehicle theft and a campaign to prevent burglaries. And they spoke to me about a campaign they ran at the Park and Ride, where people's number plates were getting stolen so that the car could be used for another crime. And there's a particular screw you can get from Bunnings that if you put in, it's almost impossible to pull it out. And it's a very cheap one. So for those watching, please do the same for your number plates. So thank you to the Neighbourhood Watch. Thank you for all that you do. And thank you for giving up your time. It is greatly appreciated by me and indeed our entire community. Deputy Speaker, I have many churches in my electorate, and I want to single one out that I attended recently for a key event, and that is St Bishoy and St Shenouda's Coptic Orthodox Church in Bulleen, and there's also in Donvale. The history of the Coptic Orthodox Church is an old one. It was founded in Egypt by St Mark in 43 AD, and it is one of the world's oldest Christian churches. Coptic is derived from the Greek word for Egyptian, and it is an Egyptian church. This particular parish moved from Springvale to Bulleen in 1981, and like many churches, it was the generosity and foresight of people who wanted something that lasted long beyond themselves, something for their children, for their grandchildren and beyond, and that is a great credit to them. The congregation has over 300, and it runs youth services and other programs, discipleship programs, and that's very important. The event that I attended, it wasn't a religious event, it was a community event, the Bulleen Festival. It was hosted by the church on Saturday, the 21st of September. There were many stalls. It included Mediterranean barbecue, face painting, Egyptian sweets, an animal farm, and many others. And more than anything, Deputy Speaker, it was a celebration of Egyptian and Coptic Orthodox culture. Can I single out the leaders of the church? Father Mina Isaac, Father Jonathan Alexander Awad, Father Salib, the Board of Deacons, which includes Treasurer George Saleh, Secretary Arini El Ashkar, and Arini kindly hosted me for the event, Abanoob Salib, Amgad Gurgis, Anj Atala, George Samuel, and Bassem Yaqub. When I was at the event, Deputy Speaker, we spoke about the Orthodox calendar and how Christmas Eve is one of the most special services that they run. And I was invited to come and join them on Christmas Eve, and I want to let them know that I will be there. And I want to thank them. They are a very special church full of generous, wonderful people who contribute to our community, and I'm so honoured to be your representative in this place, and I look forward to joining you at many more events. Thank you.
I call the member for Parramatta.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Well, last night we celebrated the 20th Diwali here in Parliament House. And in the last 2 decades, the whole of Australia has fallen in love with Diwali. From Darwin to Hobart, people right across Australia celebrate Diwali as one of the most joyous events of the year. And the reason for that is because behind all the colour and movement and lights and food and celebration, Diwali is a recognition of fundamental values. The values of positivity, of unity, of generosity, of success, and coming together as a community. And these are the values that have made people who practice the Hindu faith across Australia and across the world so successful. It's what has made the Indian diaspora in Australia such an incredibly important part of the Australian community. And so today is a good opportunity to recognise the importance of Diwali in the Australian annual calendar. In fact, I like the suggestion of the Hindu Council to call this month Hindu Heritage Month in recognition of everything that happens in this month across the Hindu calendar. From Navratri to Dashain to Karva Chauth to Diwali to Lakshmi Puja to Chat Puja to Durga Puja, all of these celebrations in October give us an opportunity to recognise this month as Hindu Heritage Month. And I want to thank the Hindu Council for everything they've done to promote the values of Diwali right across Australia. In particular, Sai Paravastu, who's here today in the chamber, as well as Surinder, Rakesh, Murali, Shanti, and Nalima. I appreciate everything you have done on behalf of the Hindu community to make the Hindu community one of the most successful waves of migration in Australia's history, and a community that delivers so much to the Australian community across sport, business, culture, media, health, and far beyond. There's much that we can do in Australia to support the Hindu community and recognise everything that it contributes to the broader Australian community. Not only can we recognise Diwali and Hindu Heritage Month, we can also support Hindu education right across Australia and make sure that Australia is a nation free of Hindu phobia, where everybody, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from, can practice their faith in peace and harmony. Deputy Speaker, Hindu Heritage Month is an occasion for us to reflect on the values that the Hindu community have brought to Australia and the contribution they've made to our nation, and it should be embraced by all Australians. Thank you.
And I call the member for O'Connor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I rise today to thank Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price for taking time to visit the remote Northern Goldfields region of O'Connor recently, where the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians received a warm Goldfields welcome despite the unseasonably cool weather. Together with Rowena Olsen, Liberal candidate for Kalgoorlie, Neil Thompson MLC, Senator Matt O'Sullivan, our strong Goldfields Liberal team was pleased to engage with community members and discuss their specific issues. A big thank you to the Shire of Laverton for hosting a cuppa at the Great Beyond Visitor Centre, which marks the start of the Outback Way, Australia's longest shortcut. The sealing of this iconic Trans-Australian highway has been a labour of love for Shire President Pat Hill. Over 27 years, he and the Outback Highway Development Council have worked relentlessly to secure over $1.2 billion in federal, state and territory funding to seal the 2,700 kilometres of road linking Laverton to Winton and through the Deputy Speaker's electorate of Lingiari via Australia's Red Centre and Jacinta's hometown of Alice Springs. In Laverton, I was proud to introduce the Minister for Indigenous Australians to a remarkable Indigenous training project, the Laverton Training Centre, a novel program run by former North Force Major Mac Jensen. Mac's bootcamp style of training has really caught on, and every time I take visitors like Peter Dutton, Julian Lisa, and now Senator Nampijinpa-Price there, they cannot fail to be impressed with the enthusiasm and achievements of his trainees. These trainees have mostly come from extremely remote communities with limited education and training opportunities, and they thrive under Mac's direction. Since 2022, almost 200 trainees have completed nationally accredited certifications, which have led to local job opportunities in more than 5 extremely remote shires, with plans to expand and replicate their successful training model. Unfortunately, despite a multitude of attempts to secure federal funding, the future of this program remains uncertain. The barren site of the proposed Laverton Hospital tells a long and sorry story. In 2015, the WA Liberal National Government allocated $19.5 million to redevelop the 1973-built Laverton Hospital. However, when the McGowan government came to power in 2017, they decided to redirect this funding to projects like the Mandurah foreshore redevelopment and the construction of a high-rise train station car park. After a public outcry, Laverton managed to claw back $4 million from the state government, and in March 2019, I secured a $16.8 million commitment from the federal coalition government to enable this much-needed project to proceed. So here we are, approaching the end of 2024, and the WA government has still not turned one sod on the Laverton Hospital site. It's an absolute travesty that Roger Cook redirected money away from this project when he was WA Health Minister and now continues to drag his heels on it as the Premier. In Leonora, the Liberals Goldfield team of Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price caught up with councillors and community members of the Shire of Leonora, Menzies, Wiluna for a cuppa and a chat. Hot topics raised with the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians included local native title issues, the effects of the withdrawal of the cashless debit card, the need for more Indigenous youth diversion activities like Renee Reddinghouse's basketball program, and the creation of a safe space for families fleeing domestic and family violence. It was my absolute pleasure to introduce Senator Price to some of my favourite Leonora leaders, including Geraldine Hogarth, who received an AO for her work in child health and language preservation, elder and dear friend Nana Gay Harris, and local councillors Fifi Harris, Lani Peterson and Naomi Sprigg de Santos, who are taking a strong stand against domestic and family violence in creating a safe house for Indigenous families where they can not only take refuge but be supported in normalising their lives. I have long supported this project and believe it could be a pilot for a new model for helping families recovering from trauma, re-engaging them in normal family behaviours, education and training, and restoring social connections. I was thrilled to secure funding for this project as an election commitment from the then coalition government, but sadly, the Albanese government, despite my ongoing representations, has failed to recognise its importance to the Leonora community. In closing, I extend my thanks to Senator Nampijinpa-Price for taking the time to travel the vast distance required to see firsthand the issues in my more remote O'Connor communities. I thank my strong Goldfields Liberal team, Rowena Olsen, candidate for Kalgoorlie, Neil Thompson MLC and Senator Matt O'Sullivan, who join me in challenging the current Labor government at both state and federal level, urging them to do better and deliver for our Goldfields communities.
I call the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And I rise to acknowledge that this weekend will be a tough weekend for many in my electorate, as it is the 2-year anniversary since our region was devastated by the October floods in 2022. The communities of Campbell's Creek, Castlemaine, Huntley and Heathcote still remember the speed, the volume and the fierceness of the water that flooded into their homes and into their streets. Unfortunately, 2 years on, some people in these areas are still not back in their homes. Long disputes with insurance companies, problems with planning, the debate about whether to invest your own money to build up higher, build up better, still unresolved. The Rochester community will come into the Bendigo electorate after the next election, and I took the opportunity around Elmore Field Days to visit and meet people of Rochester. They too were devastated by the October floods on October 13, 2022. All of the town was impacted. Over 1,000 homes had water over the floorboards, and every home had some flood damage in some way. We all remember the scenes from Rochester. For those who don't live in Victoria, it is very odd for Victoria to flood this way. It's a demonstration of how climate change is impacting our weather patterns, and the volume in which water in which we are receiving now with these heavy downpours is not something that our systems can cope with. It's why I'm proud that the federal government is working with local government to get proper planning in place, to work with these communities so that we can mitigate future flood events that may occur because of the impact of climate change. Deputy Speaker, I'm also very concerned to share with the House that in September, La Trobe University, which has a campus in my electorate, has announced the decision to close their community planning and development program. This is where many of our local planners come from. It is the 8th university in 8 years to stop delivering planning courses and programs, something that we should all be alarmed at when we're talking about reform to higher education. Right now in our country, there is a critical shortage of planners in urban and regional alike. Our own government's own data says that 43% of local governments have no planners currently working for them at all. This includes many regional towns. My own electorate, the City of Greater Bendigo, has a constant ad-up recruiting local planners to come work for them. I raise this, Deputy Speaker, because without planners, we don't have homes. Without planners, we don't have roads. Planners are essential to not just this government's commitment, but every government's commitment to solving our nation's housing crisis, to building the renewable energy infrastructure that we require to get to net zero, and to allowing for the growth needed for a future made in Australia. Planning for growth is a growing profession, yet our universities are walking away from training the planners required. Jobs and Skills Australia are currently forecasting an almost 20% increase in the demand from 2021 to 2026 on current numbers, before the fact we deal with they have nowhere to train. These secure, well-paid jobs are crucial. These are jobs in local government. These are jobs in state government. These are jobs with organisations to help get the planning done appropriately. So why are our universities, including my own, cutting and closing down planning courses? What is our university sector up to? Why are they not focused on the skills that we need? It's the latest demonstration of how our university sector needs to do better. They need to stop working in their own silos and start working with Jobs and Skills Australia, with industry like the local governments and with governments on making sure we've got the courses, offering them to students and encouraging them to consider a career in areas like planning. This should be their focus. They should be focused on training Australians to work in courses like planning. It's not a problem just that we will experience in Bendigo, but throughout the country. Higher education is an opportunity. It's an opportunity we want to see afforded to all Australians if they choose to pursue it. But we need to make sure that it is relevant to the courses and to the careers that we have available in this country.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. All of those opinions say aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The Federation Chamber stands adjourned until 10:30 a.m. on Monday, the 4th of November 2024.